Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Waverley Full Council meeting. As usual, we will be starting with a moment of reflection as soon as the YouTube is live streaming.
Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Right, well, may I introduce Nabil Nasir and Kamar Safar from the Ahmadiyya Association and invite them to lead the council in a moment of reflection. Nabil.
Assalamu alaikum. That means peace be upon you, to everyone, and hello. I would like to give you a small history of our MDM community in Waverley Borough. I mean, this blessing is an honor from Penny, a friend of mine, to do the blessings from the Muslim community to the meeting. The brief history of MDM Muslim community is in Waverley Borough. We bought a land in Tilford in 1985, which is around about 28 acres, and which now is the place where our Caliph, His Holiness Mirza Masroor Ahmad, resides. And because of that, we have now 1,300 families in the area who have bought houses and properties in the area. From the day start, we started helping the local charities, like working with the faiths to finance the different charities and stuff, and the residents, and work with the residents. The community started helping and raising the money for different kind of charities from the day first. We have also got our college, which is in Hazelmere, in which volunteers educate themselves and go around the world helping different charities and different things which we could help with in Africa, Australia, all parts of the world. And our community has been helping in this area and all of the areas around UK and wherever our community followers are, which is more than 200 countries and more than 1 million followers of it. And me being over here for the last 15 years, I've worked with different charities, different counselors, as friends like Mary Frazinski, Penny, David, Brian Adams, Carol Coburn, and loads of friends, and Julia as well. And worked with the council as well. Right now with the pandemic, we are helping local communities, local charities, schools as well, with their food banks and stuff. And loads of different stuff as well. I mean, any of the councils know any charities or any councils or any students or schools need to help. We're here to help. Penny has the address. Most of the councillors have help as well. And for this area, we've got external affairs officers, which is me. And from 1985, Mr. Munish Shamsu, who's the parish councillor as well in Tilford area. So that's the brief introduction we've done of the area. Now, Kamar Zafar will be doing the Muslim prayer and everything and telling you the details regarding it. Thank you for listening to me, and take care. You all. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Peace be upon you all. I would first of all like to thank you all for the opportunity for letting us come on and have some time today. So as Brother Nabi Nasser mentioned, there is actually a college in Hazelmere, which of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. I was lucky enough to actually study there for a number of years. And as Nabi Nasser has mentioned, part of our community is actually dedicating their time towards helping those in need during the lockdown. I, as part of AMIA, as part of the National Executive Board, I'm also having the chance to do that, whether it's delivering food and medicine and essential supplies to households out there and also to other services as well. This is our effort, and of course, this is just a physical effort. But whereas Muslims, we feel that where we have our physical endeavors, we should also pray at the same time as well, and beseech to God Almighty and supplicate as well. The prayer that I'm actually going to present today is actually the very first chapter of the Holy Quran, and is supposedly known and renowned by Muslims as the summary of the entire revealed book of God Almighty. There's actually one verse in here of particular mention, which I will recite soon, and that is literally this, that where we do endeavor physically and we try our best, at the same time, we need to remember that we should also keep supplication and prayer in our minds as well. So these two things for us as Muslims go absolutely hand in hand. So I will now recite the prayer. It's a short prayer, just 7 verses in the Arabic language. And then once I've done that, I will also translate that into English for you all, and we'll follow that just by a very short silent prayer as well. So I will just quickly do that now. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. I will now present the translation of this short prayer. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of all the worlds, the Gracious, the Merciful, Master of the Day of Judgment. Thee alone do we worship, and Thee alone do we implore for help. Guide us on the right path, the path of those on whom Thou hast bestowed Thy blessings, those who have not incurred Thy displeasure, and those who have not gone astray. Thank you very much. That was the short prayer. And now I would humbly like to request, if everybody, if you wish, we would like to now quickly take part in a short silent prayer. We as Muslims, we normally raise our hands and we pray to God in that manner. But of course, you can pray however you wish, and we would like to do that. So we would start the prayer, and the way we end the prayer is by saying Ameen, and that signifies the end of the prayer. So if you could go wherever you are, kindly join me in this silent prayer now. Ameen. Thank you very much once again for giving us the opportunity and your time. And we're very thankful for your services as well to the people and, of course, the wider community in our area. Thank you very much.
Could I say thank you very much from everybody here? It was a very interesting thing, and basically it is a good thing that we have in our midst somebody who's a group that works hard for the good of the people that it is being with. Thank you very much, and thank you for all your charity work, and I am sure we'll meet again. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. And everybody, can I just give them a minute to leave the YouTube, and then we'll start on the main event. Thank you. Right, have they gone? Right. Informal question time. There are no informal questions. And shall I start with the welcome, introduction and procedures as usual? Welcome members and the public to the council meeting. Members are supported this evening by the Chief Executive, Tom Horwood, Strategic Directors, Annie Wrighton and Graham Clark, the Head of Policy and Governance, Robin Taylor, the Head of Finance and Property, Peter Vickers, the Borough Solicitor, Daniel Bainbridge, and the Democratic Services Manager, Fiona Cameron. Members, please use the hand raise facility in Zoom to indicate that you wish to speak. If you lose your connection, please rejoin as quickly as you can. If anyone feels it would help their internet connection to shut off the video, please do so. If the live stream to YouTube fails, we will pause proceedings to enable that to be re-established. Before moving to the next item, for practical reasons, I'm waiving Council Rule 21.1, the requirement for members to stand to speak. So we move to item 1 on the agenda. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've received apologies from Councillors Simon Deere, Jackie Keane and Kika Mirrlees.
Right, thank you. The minutes of the council meeting held on the 15th of December 2020. Does anyone have an issue with the accuracy of the minutes? I don't see any hands up. So if no one has any objections, members, would you please unmute your microphones and indicate your agreements to the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of December 2020?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. I will sign these later. Declarations of interest. Have there been any declarations prior to the meeting?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors David and Jenny Else have declared an interest in item 9.5 as their son is a Waverley officer. Item 11 on this evening's agenda relates to my proposed appointment as Deputy Electoral Registration Officer. So although that proposed appointment doesn't impact on my remuneration, I think it right and proper for me to declare an interest in that item, and I will leave the meeting for the duration of it being discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, for declaring your interest in item 11 and for confirming you will leave the Zoom meeting for the duration of that item. Are there any other declarations that people wish to make? Right, no hands up. So I'll move on to Mayor's announcements.
Madam Mayor, forgive me. I'm working on a new device and I can't find the hands up, but I think I similarly have to declare an interest in, I think it's item 11, as having a member of the family as a Waverley officer. I had overlooked this until now, so I'm grateful for the prompt. Thank you. And in the meantime, I will try and find my hands up icon.
Right, thank you. Mayor's announcements. Well, I will read them if you give me the authority, because I always forget something that I'm supposed to be saying. So I've written, here we are, hopefully nearing the end of what has been a hugely different and difficult time. And I think that's an understatement in most cases. It has been more than different and extremely difficult for us all. I hope that you and your families, all the staff and the members, have kept safe and well. And my condolences to all those families whose loved ones have been adversely affected by it. We are extremely fortunate that the pandemic phase of this virus now seems to be coming to an end. And the vaccination programme in Waverley has played a huge part in making this happen. I'm sure we'll take a moment to thank all the volunteers and, of course, the National Health Service staff members who have made the way ahead so much brighter, as well as caring for the huge number of people that were hospitalised during the last 2 months. It has been amazing to see how adaptable people have been and their desire to engage with and help others. I'm incredibly proud of our staff. Everyone in Waverley has pulled together and quickly adapted to new ways of working. And I would especially like to thank the outside workforce, such as the refuse collectors, who have had an exceptionally large number of people off work with COVID at the height of the third wave, and had to draft in office staff and management to keep the refuse collections going at all. There was, of course, disruption, and we are very sorry for that, but everyone worked hard to ensure that household rubbish was collected in the most trying of circumstances. And so a big thanks to staff and contractors for going the extra mile for this. While COVID-19 restrictions have made it difficult personally to visit events, I have very much enjoyed joining in various community groups and events online, and also keep in touch with staff and fellow councillors in the same way. One of the big drawbacks to being a COVID-19 mayor is that I've not been able to raise money for my 3 charities, which you may remember are the Sea Cadets, the 40 Degrees Youth Centre, and the Home Start Waverley. I'm really hoping that the situation will improve and that the government will allow me to do something to help them before the end of May, when the new mayor takes over. So watch this space. We will now move on to the business of the night. The agenda is very large, and to allow for full discussion while everyone is still awake, we have timetabled an extra meeting in case of a potential overrun of time. We have also the potential of rearranging the agenda to facilitate this. With councillors' approval, of course, we propose to move the agenda item 10 to directly after 9.1, as this is a natural progression and gives a potential for more time to be spent later in the agenda or at a later date. Right, can I move on now then to the next, the leaders' announcements. Agenda item 5. Could I invite you, Councillor Ward, to make any announcements?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I was hoping to keep my actual talking short, as we have a massive agenda. But in view of what was said and was not said yesterday during the announcements, I thought I ought to say a few things about how that might affect the council. Can you hear me okay, Madam Mayor?
I can, yes.
Fine, okay. Yesterday, the Prime Minister spelt out his plan. I don't know why everything's called a roadmap nowadays, for easing lockdown. And apart from schools reopening, there is little of immediate effect on us as a council. We are continuing to sustain our vulnerable people, including the 750 extra names recently added to the list, and we are supporting the amazing efforts of the NHS vaccination teams. However, there remains some confusion over campaigning for the forthcoming elections and the future of remote or hybrid meetings of the council and its committees. The current arrangements have a sunset clause, which means they expire on the 7th of May 2021. And so, whilst our next council meeting on the 20th of April can be conducted remotely, unless the law is changed, we will be obliged to hold our annual meeting, scheduled for the 25th of May, live in the chamber. This may cause considerable problems for some members on the grounds of age, vaccination status, or susceptibility to infection. Waverley, along with many other councils, and the Local Government Association have pleaded with ministers to allow a continuation of some form of remote meetings. But so far, the standard reply has been, it will require a change in primary legislation and there is no room in the parliamentary timetable. This despite finding time to amend the law to improve some ministerial employment terms. However, I am hearing rumours from the back office that things might be done to change this, and I look forward with great optimism. The stricture to work from home, if at all possible, will remain, and mask wearing and social distancing are likely to be still in force at the end of May. I note that from the 17th of May, theatre performances, perhaps the nearest thing to council meetings, will be able to recommence with appropriate social distancing, but restrictions on the numbers allowed to attend weddings and funerals will remain. We are seeking some clarity on this, but if the requirements for social distancing remain in force, we may have to consider leaving alternate seats in the council chamber vacant and coming to an inter-party agreement to limit the number of councillors according to the proportion of their respective parties. Finally, please look at and feel the weight of the current agenda, running to almost 400 pages, in the light of our need to cut costs and our climate emergency policy. And please be open to accepting some more council papers in electronic form once we are back to having face-to-face meetings in the chamber. To end on a happier note, I'm pleased to see that as of now, Waverley is once again in its normal, I would say rightful position as having the lowest infection rate in the county. And I thank all our residents and local businesses for the huge effort they are putting in to make this possible and to keep us there. With your indulgence, Madam Mayor, I would like to ask members of my executive to give out some quick information on items under their portfolios that are not on tonight's agenda.
That's fine.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could I call on Councillor Merriweather?
Thank you, Leader. Actually, I think you're going to have more than enough of me tonight, so I will just limit myself to the budget matter a little bit later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Just very briefly, first of all, to reiterate the thanks that the Mayor voiced in the initial remark to our waste teams in a most difficult situation, most challenging situation. Of course, as a result of the pressures that were on, as a result of members of staff suffering from COVID, shielding, and having to self-isolate, Waverley Borough Council's garden waste service had to be suspended during that period of the pandemic. I'm very pleased to be able to announce that our garden waste service will resume at the beginning of March, now that staffing levels are improving. Following the suspension of the service in January, garden waste customers will see a return to their fortnightly collection service on Monday, the 1st of March. And all existing customers will receive a letter or an email advising them of the start date and information regarding the extension of the annual subscription that results from that. The other small items that I just want to bring to the attention of the council. First of all, I'm delighted to be able to announce that our sustainability team put in a very successful bid from the decarbonisation fund, and plans will be going ahead for the retrofitting of the Memorial Hall in Farnham as a result of the grant from the decarbonisation fund. Finally, we have appointed a new member of our sustainability team in Waverley. The Sustainable Transport Officer is a man who has enormous experience of both project management and sustainable and active transport. And Thomas Lancaster will be taking up the post very shortly. So I'm delighted to welcome him to the sustainability team in Waverley, and I'm sure members will have an opportunity to meet him during the coming period.
Thank you. Councillor Rosamond.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening to everyone. Brief update. With the return with regard to housing operations, despite lockdown, involvement with the tenants tower has continued by way of a number of Zoom meetings, which is fantastic. And we're very fortunate to have such a proactive group of tenants being involved. With regard to rental, given the impact of coronavirus, the team are doing well. And the arrears are up under 1%, which is great news considering the national average is 3.68. The number of voids is falling. The team are working hard to clear the backlog from the first lockdown. Unlike the first lockdown, responsive repairs have continued and gas safety checks carried out. Virtual viewings have allowed tenants to take on lettings. And officers are working as best they can in this third lockdown, but social distancing and the inability to meet with our tenants face to face does have some issues. So we need to be very clear on maintaining and improving communication. In terms of housing delivery, the Otford Ridge project continues apace. Demolition has begun on Site B and the planning application for Site C has been submitted. There were less homeless people presenting in this latest lockdown. As it stands at the moment, we've got 3 single people in York Road in Woking and 1 in B&B, and 1 person, unfortunately, who's a rough sleeper, declined all offers of accommodation. And under the government's Next Steps accommodation programme, a grant has been obtained for 2 modular units for temporary housing for rough sleepers. Timescales are tight, but a site is being considered and planners have provided pre-app advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. Good evening, Madam Mayor and colleagues. The brief report on Brightwells and planning policy. At the recent board meeting, Brightwells board meeting on 4th of February, Chris Nicholson informed us that they're having to put back the opening date of the Brightwells scheme from July of this year to September. This didn't come as a great surprise. Crest had done a pretty good job on keeping up with the building programme, but inevitably with the pandemic, it's caused certain delays. So that's one of the reasons. The second reason that they're still working, and they've also had delays because of the pandemic, in finding tenants for the shops and restaurants. So they're the 2 reasons why it's had to go back. But Crest are still confident that they'll be able to open in September, and that they'll be able to find sufficient tenants to get the scheme off to a good start. On planning policy, LPP2, we had something like 430 responses to the consultation, coming from a wide range of respondents, residents and organisations. The planning policy team under Graham Parrott is very much still analysing these responses. That's a big job. And they're currently arranging some meetings with some of the key stakeholders like Natural England and Thames Water to discuss with them some interesting aspects of their responses. The team will be preparing presentations and reports to the executive and to the appropriate environment ONS committee, and that will happen in the next week or few weeks and months, couple of months or so. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there's an important consultation coming up in planning area on the National Policy Planning Framework, the NPPF, and changes to that cause a result of the introduction of a government scheme to do with planning. I guess you'd call it, it's called the National Model Design Code. It's to do with design, actually. This is an interesting and important consultation, and I'd encourage anyone who's sufficiently interested to respond themselves. But if people are particularly interested in making a contribution to Waverley's response, they're very welcome to write to me, and I will actually look at their responses and discuss with the planning policy team if any of their suggestions should be incorporated into Waverley's response. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Leader. That's my short report.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Leader. And good evening, Madam Mayor and colleagues. 3 points. First, the routine report on parking. And at present, it remains at an extremely low level, well under 50% of normal. And we anticipate that will continue during the lockdown and that it will gradually improve thereafter. But colleagues will appreciate it's out of our control. Secondly, the community infrastructure levy deadline for applications has been reached, and the advisory committee, which examines them in accordance with the announced criteria, will be meeting next week and will then make recommendations to the executive on how this round of funding should be allocated, and we'll also be recommending when the next round is held. Thirdly, with the gradual opening of non-essential shops in view, and of course the existing shops, Waverley Borough Council's environmental health team will be working with health and safety executive officials to offer businesses extra support and advice about the COVID guidelines. There's been such a panoply of different advice over recent months that I think shop owners could be forgiven for not being absolutely sure what they need to do, what they can do, and how they can play their part in making sure that the revival of business in our communities is not associated with a revival of transmission of the disease. So during the checks, businesses will get support and guidance which will help them manage COVID-19 risk and protect their staff and customers and visitors. And we will be proactively contacting businesses about this, but they're also very welcome to contact us if they've got particular questions.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a very brief update. The leisure centres remain closed and will be until the end of the financial year. The Prime Minister's announcements yesterday have given some hope that we will be able to reopen early in April. This year we have been working closely with Places Leisure to keep the cost of the council as low as possible, and we are currently operating within the budget envelope agreed by the council in August. We will now turn our attention to working with Places Leisure to agree an approach for the centre's safe reopening. Initially with statutory operating restrictions, which will hopefully be lifted at some point during the year. There is provision within the budget for this, which we hope will be sufficient, but we will keep this under close scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and fellow councillors. Just a quick update on the service level agreements. It has been a very challenging year for the organisations concerned, especially with the impact of COVID-19 on their operations. It has felt that keeping up the same level of agreements for the next year will enable the said organisations to review their business plans and delivery of services. It also continues to support the most vulnerable in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members. I'd like to take this opportunity to apologise once again for the issue with our planning portal last week. My thanks go to Councillor Carl Coburn, who first alerted us to the slow download speeds a week past Friday. And unfortunately, as we were going to find out, this wasn't going to be an easy nor a quick fix. The problem was caused by the interaction between the server upgrade by our supplier, Civica, and the settings within our own security systems, and which, with the greatest will in the world, could not have been reasonably predicted by either party. Civica and our IT team worked through a series of tests and adjustments between the interfaces of both systems, and this has resulted in the performance returning to a normal level. My apologies are also extended to members of the public, as well as town and parish councils, who access the system on a regular basis. Of course, the planning portal is much more than just a repository for planning documents. It provides access for members of the public who wish to make their planning applications online, and they can also look up planning applications and make comments online. And it also provides details of all planning decisions on a weekly basis. So all in all, it is an extremely useful and valuable resource, which we will be monitoring very closely over the coming weeks. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, Madam Mayor and members. Following the announcement from the PM yesterday, the Comms and Engagement team will be working to communicate with residents the detail of what that means, both nationally and locally, as this is clarified further by the government, which is what they've been doing pretty much for this entire pandemic and very successfully. So that's all from me. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Madam Mayor, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Leader. We now move on to agenda item 6, which is questions from members of the public. There is one question from Mrs. Karen Lancaster of Godalming. Councillor Merriweather, could you please read out Mrs. Lancaster's question and respond? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't actually have the question in front of me. I've got the response, but if someone else has got the question, that would be very helpful. Oh, there it is. Okay. So the question from Mrs. Lancaster is, how or by whom is the new brackets 10 million close brackets property investment fund to be managed? What percentage fee will be charged for the management and administration? So that's the question. And thank you, Mrs. Lancaster. It's a deceptively simple question, and it really breaks down into 3 elements, which I'd like to unpack and deal with separately if I can. Firstly, just the existence of a property investment fund. The short answer to that is no, we do not have a property investment fund, and I'm very happy to clarify that. But as part of our capital strategy, we do have a property investment strategy, which is one of the pillars of our medium-term financial plan, which is specifically targeted at capital investment in assets that generated much needed revenue income, as well as advancing our corporate strategy. We have to do this, however reluctantly, to replace the revenue that the government is, one way or another, denying us. We also have to do this within public sector financial regulations that differ to those in the private sector, and where, for example, even the terms fund and funding have important differences in meaning. These rules also mean, for example, that even if we have cash, well, we can't use it to spend on services unless appropriate revenue funding is also available. But we can use capital funds and even borrow to invest in property to generate revenue funds that we can spend on services. Right, secondly, I'd like to clarify how we do manage our investment properties and our other property assets. So our investment property portfolio, which we own directly, is only about 5% of our total property assets. We also own and manage around 5,000 council houses, plus our own estate, which includes offices, leisure centres, car parks, sports grounds and pavilions, play parks, and all sorts of other community facilities, from public halls to youth club huts. All of these we manage ourselves internally and have dedicated housing and estates teams to do that. Now, thirdly, I would just like to clarify the policies the council has to govern its investment property activities. These are codified in our property investment strategy that I mentioned earlier, which covers all appropriate aspects of this, including the legal framework under which our powers are regulated, through to the due diligence, risk and return appraisals that we're required for individual asset assessments. The property investment strategy is reviewed regularly and was last updated by Council a year ago in February 2020. It's public and published on our website. And in fact, prior to its approval, it went through its own governance journey with reviews by the executive and an overview and scrutiny committee. And all of these meetings, council, executive and ONS, were broadcast to the public on our council YouTube stream, and the recordings of all of those meetings are still publicly available to view on demand. As well as the policy itself, individual investments are also subject to a process as they arise, although in some cases, naturally, we are obliged to discuss some details in confidence if they're commercially sensitive, especially for our counterparty. For that reason, the executive established a cross-party advisory board to work with officers to pre-filter opportunities so that only the most appropriate ones advance for consideration. Embedded in this process is the securing of appropriate, independent, expert professional advice. The most recent investment decision, which I think may have inspired this question, was made in November and December last year. And while these meetings did have to go into confidential session, I was glad to be able to at least introduce the investment in the context of the strategy while we were still in public session. These meetings and the relevant reports are again published as far as they can be on our website, and they were again broadcast on our YouTube channel where recordings remain available to view on demand today. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I hope, Mrs. Lancaster, that answers your question.
There are no questions from the public, so we'll move on to agenda item 8. Yes. No questions from members, should I say, rather than them. So we move on to agenda item 8. The 2 motions have been submitted, and the leader has confirmed he feels that these should be debated at the meeting this evening. The first motion has been submitted by Councillor Steve Williams and seconded by Councillor John Ward and is set out in your agenda. Councillor Williams, would you like to introduce your motion on the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know why there's a screen. All right, sorry. The Climate Change Act was passed in the UK in November 2008, and one might remember it was passed with an overwhelming majority across political parties. It sets out emission reduction targets that the UK must comply with legally, and it represented the first global legally binding climate change mitigation target set by any country in the world. Now, that Climate Change Act in 2008 was a step in the right direction, committed the UK to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050 compared to 1990 levels. But as we know, it has been overtaken by events. In 2019, the UK government committed to a net zero target by 2050. Many are now urging that this should be brought forward to 2030, and many councils up and down the country, like ours, have declared a climate emergency and are committed towards working towards carbon neutrality by 2030. So there is clear evidence that without more significant and sustained action, we cannot secure the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees C limit in global temperatures between 2030 and 2040. And the current UK target of net zero by 2050 is not satisfactory. People will say that it is costly to move this rapidly to net zero, but the costs of failing to address this crisis will far outstrip the investment required to prevent it. So the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill is in effect an attempt to bring in a new Climate Change Act. It's submitted as a private members bill brought forward by Caroline Lucas MP, and its objectives are to ensure that the UK plays its fair and proper role in limiting global temperatures to 1.5 degrees and actively conserves the natural world. It was drawn up by a formidable list of climate experts, including Professor Tim Jackson from the University of Surrey, just down the road from us, and one of the world's leading authorities on sustainable development, along with many others. The bill involves making a plan that takes full account of all of our emissions through what we consume as well as what we produce. It involves protecting and conserving nature here and overseas along supply chains, taking account of the damage we cause through goods we consume, like plastics. It ensures that we act on current information rather than waiting for some undefined technological advance to save us. And it gives ordinary people a say on the way forward through a citizens' assembly. So this motion proposes that Waverley Council publicly declares its support for the cross-party Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. And beyond this, like a number of councils already have done, we are asking for the leader of the council, who is seconding this motion on behalf of the executive, to be empowered to write to our MPs, calling on them to join us in supporting this bill. I would be delighted to see our two MPs joining the 98 members of Parliament across 7 political parties who are sponsoring this bill. So I beg to move the motion.
Right, thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Ward, would you like to second the motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd be delighted to second it, and I will not take a lot of your time. I would like to stress that this is not an executive motion, but is a motion of conscience. So there is therefore a free vote, but I am happy to support it, and I believe that my executive will also be doing that. And really, I don't have anything else to add after Councillor Williams' skillful presentation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Now move on. Are there any other speakers? At the moment, I have just one. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is a bill signed by multiple parties and MPs nationally that seeks to make a reality of promises made by the government and others. I think it could have been argued that this council writing to our MPs and asking them to support this bill could have been authorised via our existing climate emergency mandate to lobby and encourage outside bodies and the government to act appropriately in this space. But that being said, I'm pleased to see this question at full council, and as leader of the Liberal Democrat group here at Waverley, I note this bill is supported by my colleagues in Parliament and by many experts, eminent experts on the subject of climate change. And so I'm very happy to support both the motion here and the intent of the bill itself in its unenviable quest to combat what is a growing greenwash at all levels of government. And so I very much support this motion and urge other members to do so too. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Next, Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let me give you some good reasons why I will not be supporting this motion. Firstly, the motion has come out of nowhere with no background material other than that which Councillor Williams has just delivered to us. So the lack of background information is not a sound basis on which to make an informed decision. Secondly, at least one of our MPs doesn't need prodding into doing the right thing with regard to the environment. The reason that the COP26 summit is coming to Glasgow is because of Jeremy Hunt, when he was Foreign Secretary, fighting for it hard and winning it for the UK. Well, why is that important? It's a question of leadership. So thirdly, where is this leadership? Well, in this week's Economist, members will find an article which shows that Great Britain has decarbonised faster than any other rich country since 1990. Moreover, I understand that the bill that we are asked to support seeks to examine the UK's global carbon footprint, such as indirect UK emissions in our supply chain, which may affect developing countries. The UK remains committed to environmentally sustainable development as set out in the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. And to this end, the Prime Minister announced in January that the UK will spend at least 3 billion of international climate finance on nature and biodiversity over 5 years. The funding will deliver transformational change in protecting biodiversity-rich land and ocean, shifting to sustainable food production and supply, and supporting the livelihoods of the world's poorest. So I'm sure we could always do better, but that's real leadership. And then there's the reality of having to cope with the impact of COVID on finances. Having declared a climate emergency some 18 months ago, we would expect to see a Waverley budget full of climate projects. Well, the line item for climate change projects in Annex 5 of our general fund budget shows TBD as the spend for next year. Now, I can accept this as a necessary pragmatism, but it does demonstrate that now is not the time for the proposed bill from the perspective of cost. So let's stop playing politics with this serious item and recognise that the current government is doing pretty well, and that asking for more at a time when the economy has taken such a major hit shows a detachment from reality. I am all for an ambitious climate and environment programme, but support for this motion is support for putting politics ahead of pragmatism, which is not for me, I'm afraid. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to support the motion on behalf of the Labour Group, but not because I see it as a particularly political issue, as Councillor Seaborn's address might have suggested. The point that he made that Jeremy Hunt might already be raising this issue and have raised it in the past, I think that's entirely welcome. And I remember when I was an MP, I always welcomed local councils supporting good initiatives. So I think it's something where we can all work together without trying to score points against each other in the process. I will say that I was parliamentary private secretary to the Energy Minister during the 1997 to 2010 period. So I'm familiar with the decarbonisation to which Councillor Seaborn refers. And a substantial reason for that was the move away from the use of coal, which was a one-off improvement, which we were doing in any case, which had extremely welcome side effect on the level of carbon emissions. Since then, however, Britain has slowed down, and in accordance with the resolution on the climate emergency, which was overwhelmingly passed by cross-party support in this council, it would be odd if we didn't take the opportunity to support a further measure in this direction. Now, I would stress that this is a measure which is probably unlikely to become law in its current state. What it is a reminder that MPs and councils around the country feel that as we start to emerge from the COVID crisis, we should not revert to business as usual, but we should seek to build a Britain which is better than what we had before. And part of that needs to be a contribution to the global effort on climate change, which, as Councillor Seaborn says, will be featured at the COP26 event, which we're looking forward to in November in Glasgow. I hope that councillors will put aside party political reservations that they may have. If this motion is passed, I will not see it as a criticism of Conservative MPs or the government, but as an encouragement to everyone across parties who wants to see our joint objective of a major contribution against climate change by Britain. I hope Council will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, thank you very much, Maria. I've been aware of climate change emergencies since 1991. The real problem is that pollution is the cheapest option. And I'll make sure that pollution is not the cheapest option, then we're going nowhere. When I scanned this bill, it looks as it's 258 pages. One of my concerns was it frequently refers to targets where it should refer to limits. As many, I've already written to my MP, asking for better environmental protection, and I've received a favourable reply. I will not be supporting the motion because I can't see the point in it. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'd very much like to support Councillor Williams' motion. This Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill seeks to expand on the ambitions of the Climate Change Act and also seeks to establish a citizens' assembly. This is a really positive opportunity, you know, to cast aside party political divides and stand as one to tackle climate change. And this council has, along with many other councils across the country, declared a climate emergency. And we need to act with a sense of urgency now, which is exactly what this bill calls for. We don't have to look far. I mean, talking about needing more background evidence, we don't have to look far to see for ourselves the increase in extreme weather events. You know, yet again today, Sir David Attenborough's been appealing to world leaders about climate change and action and more rapid action against climate change. Last year, last July, we saw the hottest temperatures on record in this country, 38.7 degrees centigrade, and more flash flooding, which is becoming a really common occurrence. And we have it ourselves, you know, in our own villages and towns. That is the background evidence. We see it every single day. Our own Met Office data shows that from 1980, extreme weather events have almost tripled, and flooding events have almost increased by fourfold. And this cannot continue without a rapid intervention. Every year we have the State of Nature report about the loss of nature in the UK. And last year, a loss of nature in the UK since 1970 being recorded. And last year it recorded, amongst lots of other data, a 15% of species under threat of extinction in the UK, and 41% of UK species had fallen, and 133 species had already been lost from our shores. So this isn't about politics, it's about supplementing the Climate Change Act, and it's about acting rapidly. And as Councillor Williams has mentioned, it's been written by top scientists, including our own Tim Jackson from Surrey University, and it just sets a clear and urgent pathway to achieve a zero carbon economy. And I very much wholeheartedly support it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's with some sadness that I also, like Councillor Edmonds, Councillor Seaborn, will not be able to support this motion. I too would like to have seen a from Councillor Williams setting out why he thought it was going to be a positive move. I have read the bill. And the first thing that I noticed is, of course, it was simply calling upon other people in the shape of the government to do something. It didn't actually give guidance as to what actual measures should be put in place. And I think all of us know that there's a huge challenge there. And I think the elephant in the room which don't address, and this doesn't address any more than any other measure, is the population. The population of the world has quadrupled in 100 years. I saw recently a very fine video by Professor Chris Whitty on vaccination over the last 50 years, and it's not difficult to see why our population is so large, because basically we have conquered infant mortality to a staggering extent, but human reproduction rates have not fallen in line. So now we have 7.8 billion people over the planet. The UK has a growing population as well. And I mention all this because unless we take everyone with us, nothing is going to happen. British people are pragmatic, and they can spot tokenism a mile off. And I fear that this is exactly that. I read with interest a document written in September by Andy Newman, who is a GMB member in Labour list, and he was being very cautious about it. He felt in particular is what would be the impacts on the actual costs experienced by ordinary people, particularly in the realm of heating, where gas heating is, sadly, you might say, so much cheaper than electric heating. And unless that sort of practical aspect is fully grasped, you're not going to get buy-in. And when I read this bill, and the language has to be complicated because it is in the form of a parliamentary bill, my heart sank a little. And in particular, the one which did show me how perhaps people are letting optimism rule their hearts. The way in which the government is supposed to act is primarily, this is D1, primarily by reducing the anthropogenic greenhouse gas source, fair enough, and two, by actively restoring and enhancing natural climate solutions than the United Kingdom, both natural and human modified ecosystems as resilient carbon sinks. Well, assuming you can get your mind around that, and I do know what they're talking about, all I can say is please go and read a superb book, which has been updated, called Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air by David Mackay. Read that and then realize how unrealistic that second limb in particular is. The other criticism which has been made of this bill, which I'm not sure is entirely fair, is that it appears to be against carbon capture technology. If it is, then it's a huge mistake. Given the population pressures that we have and which we're not going to see solved inside decades, unless we use technology to suck carbon dioxide out of the air, we are in serious trouble. And no one who is arguing for effective measures should do anything other than to boost the use of technology and research to enable us to cope with this growing problem. But to try and treat the British public as some sort of problem to be dealt with is a huge mistake. And I feel that this bill does precisely that. So that, Madam Mayor, is why I cannot regrettably support this motion or this bill.
Thank you, Councillor Mulliner. Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. It's extraordinary, isn't it, how if you just don't want to support a motion or can't support a motion, it's assumed that you don't support the main aim. You know, there isn't anybody who's campaigned harder for climate change and started way back when I was a student. So I hate to think anyone thinks I'm just against campaigning. I'm not. But we do all know that democracy, it may be the worst form of government, except for all the others that have been tried, but it's what we have. It's what we live by, and it's how we make decisions. This bill is not doing that. This is a pressure group. Let's be quite honest. This is a pressure group. It's all over their website. And this pressure group wants to subvert democracy, doesn't want to have the normal democratic process, the checks and balances. It wants, because it believes that it has the monopoly of wisdom, it wants to change policy through its own thoughts and wishes. That's not democracy by any measure. And I really find this so frustrating when you've got an issue as important as this, and it's coming down to, as I say, a pressure group whose methods are not ones that I would ever support. And before, again, you think that's because I'm a nice old lady who sits in my house and never does anything naughty. I marched, I sat in, but I never interrupted traffic. I never stopped people earning a living, and I never left litter. I never damaged anything. You can have a campaign, you can have a passion, and you can still fight for it. And everything that I have fought for, I have done it as democratically as possible. This is not a democratic bill. I'm sorry, it really isn't. It's a way of avoiding all the normal checks and balances we have. And as for the natural processes they want that they're pushing forward, they're completely unworkable. I support the Cumbria peatlands. I don't know if anybody knows Cumbria well, but I support the peatlands up there. Great supporter of restoring this. But you know how long it takes to restore a peat bog? I mean, it grows so slowly. So I actually looked it up because I didn't know. And, you know, it takes 1,000 years to make a metre depth of peat. Now, if you're going to do anything to improve the climate, and you're going to do it by natural means, which is what this bill says, then you are talking thousands of years to get anywhere. And this has to be a balance between modern technologies, between natural technologies, natural processes, and then we can come to something that, as Councillor Mulliner says, doesn't harm the vast majority of the population, but actually does seek. And I've just been going through the MPPF to see the wording there, and there's a huge amount going in there about climate change. I just don't believe that the main parties are oblivious of all of this. I just think they are being reasonable, thoughtful. They're taking the same advice as other people, but they are talking about it and debating it. And I'm afraid I think this is the worst kind of lobbying. And I don't think it's our duty. I will talk to everybody, every party, every group that comes to talk to me, but I will not support them and put others to the side unless I have evidence that they have the correct solution. And in this case, I'm actually a little bit embarrassed about this motion, because I don't think it shows the council off in a good light. It's ill-informed, it's poorly phrased, and I actually think a little bit immature. So I'm afraid there's absolutely no way I can support this as a motion, although I support the concept.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Councillor Hyman.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I've listened to what others have said, and I do share the concerns that a number of people have said, particularly Councillor Seaborn saying that we have no information. And my concern with this is that actually I don't think we have any basis in the Constitution for agreeing to this without the information. Article 13 of our Constitution requires that we have adequate information, the information that we need, in order to make a decision. And this isn't an in-principle commitment to the aim of decarbonising the economy, which I mean, I agree with Councillor Mulliner and Seaborn and Coburn on that you know, all of us, I think, are united on issues of, you know, how we do need to go forward. And I, for one, have been, as you know, have been sticking my head above the parapet on environmental issues and environmental law for getting on for 20 years now, and that's nothing by comparison to others that are on this Zoom call, I know. But I am concerned that we have to do things properly, and I think we're here for our residents, and I don't think our residents want us to be, the word tokenism has been used, it's words. I don't think that we should be agreeing to something without any knowledge of actually what we're agreeing to, because I would have to ask, how many people here, apart from those who have spoken and said so, how many people know exactly what the CEE bill proposes? I'm not saying I'm against it. I mean, I haven't read it all. I simply haven't had time. And I certainly haven't had time to discuss it with people. I know people who are well in favour of it, and I know people who are very much against. I know the Labour Party is split on it. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, we need to discuss this, perhaps have it in front of the Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee if they have time, before we did make any decisions to agree to something which is a parliamentary motion, a private member's bill, if we're giving our agreement to something, surely we ought to know what we're giving our agreement to. That is our constitution. We should not be making decisions like this. And I mean, I admire the bravery of the people who put it forward, and I can understand. I'm friends with a lot of the people who strongly support this, but nevertheless, we have due process, and we do. I think, you know, we can't just represent some of our friends. We have to represent all of our residents and their interests. You know, if this isn't tokenism, if it isn't tokenism, then what are we agreeing to exactly? If someone can tell me that precisely, then that would be handy. But it's not here in front of me. We're being, you know, we have to do the right thing. Madam Mayor, you said it in your when you first became mayor, that we're going to do the right thing under your leadership, and ignoring our constitution in this manner, it really, as far as I'm concerned, isn't doing the right thing. If this is the right thing to support, I'll happily do so, but I don't know whether it is. I hear a lot of people talking about they're talking about protecting biodiversity, protecting nature. Well, when I put a motion forward that's based on law and simple statements of fact, everybody decides that no, they don't want to obey the laws we've already got. So, you know, I'm certainly not going to vote in favour of this. I think I'll be without this sufficient information, I'm going to have to abstain. I do want proper science-based, truth-based decision making, and although I generally support what this is putting forward, I don't know exactly, and I will, I think, be abstaining on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Costa.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I must be a bit of an anorak or something. When I see a motion like this, and I really haven't even seen the bill described anywhere else, I go away and I research it, and I read it, and I read the debate that there was in the House, and it was pretty obvious as well at that stage from some of the researching I was doing that a lot of this was being driven by Extinction Rebellion. So I went and looked at their website and saw what they had to say about it, and I reached some pretty clear conclusions. I'm not going to go into the detail of why I think the bill itself is inadequate and more about aspiration than realistic opportunity for delivery and change. But one of the things I do want to draw out, which hasn't been said today, is I don't know how many people realise that buried within this bill is a proposal which, frankly, is a very serious attack, in my view, on our democratic systems. There was a proposal for a citizens' assembly which will be selected at random from the population, I'm not quite clear by whom, and will then have the opportunity to direct the Secretary of State and members of government. Well, I'm sorry, I actually believe in our democratic systems. And actually, we have a government at the moment that's done pretty well on this. They've got a much better record than many developed nations. Councillor Williams would have us believe that nothing's been done for years and years and years and years. Well, just over a year ago, the Prime Minister set out a 10-point programme to take us forward in these areas, and backed it with £12 billion worth of committed expenditure. Well, to be honest with you, I think we ought to be putting our trust in our elected government of whatever party. It isn't a party issue in that sense, rather than allow this to be subverted by other groups who just want to replace their own unelected agenda with that of the elected government. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Costa. Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you'll know, I'm Mayor of Hazelmere and leader. I have found it very frustrating that we passed our own climate emergency probably 18 months ago. The problem is that we are very limited on what we can do. With Waverley's help, we have indeed got some of it on track so that we can at least limit the amount of carbon and put it into our contract. So therefore, I would support anything that helps the government or that direction to assist us in getting more of these emergency climate tactical exercises working. Therefore, I will be supporting this because I want to see more action by the government, not less. So please help the town parish councils and ourselves in promoting this climate at the highest level. So I will certainly be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rubini. I don't have any other hands. So, Councillor Williams, would you like to reply? Councillor Williams?
Certainly, thanks. I'm just unmuting. Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. This is not about Extinction Rebellion. It's not about some fringe pressure group. It's not about some wild-eyed tree huggers. It is actually a motion before Parliament in a private member's bill. If I can go through some of the objections that have been raised, which quite frankly astonished me. I mean, I'm surprised that Councillor Seaborn and Councillor Hyman urge opposition to this motion tonight, and therefore opposition to the bill, I suspect, on the basis of lack of information. That councillors will not have read anything about the bill, notwithstanding the notice period of this meeting, notwithstanding the widespread media coverage of the climate and ecological emergency bill and the ready availability of such information. If it's escaped the notice of Councillor Seaborn and Councillor Hyman, I find this quite surprising, to be honest. I think we got to the nub of the argument when Councillor Seaborn suggested that we cannot afford this. And I want to come to that in a moment. Councillor Molyneux raised the question of tokenism, and a number of councillors have expressed this view. Tokenism, is it tokenism to map out a path to zero carbon and present what Councillor Townsend described as a clear and urgent pathway to zero carbon? I think the real argument is that we are faced here tonight with an attempt to kind of produce a party political response to a cross-party initiative. And I find that very, very surprising from our opposition group. The real argument, because that relates to the cost, is utterly spurious. We cannot afford this, they say. But do councillors who have expressed this really understand the enormous, devastating costs of 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees Celsius rise in global temperatures above pre-industrial levels, the impact of climate change, the extreme weather events, the crop failures, the starvation, the pandemics that will result from that? This is astonishing, Madam Mayor. And what I'm absolutely surprised about is that one councillor, Councillor Coburn, talked about us subverting democracy, that it's about subverting democracy. You know, we're talking here about a private member's bill sponsored by 98 MPs across 7 different political parties. And is it to subvert democracy, to develop a citizens' assembly to enable a representative sample of the population chosen by sortition, well informed as a result of being provided with the information that they need, being part of a process of mapping out this very urgent pathway to carbon neutrality that we desperately need as a matter of absolute urgency? This council recognised the urgency of the climate and ecological emergency in September 2019.
Councillor Williams, you've had your 4 minutes. Do you think you could wrap up very quickly?
Can I come to a conclusion? Yes, I mean, this council recognised the urgency of the climate and ecological emergency in September 2019. It's planned its own citizens' assembly, and it has developed its own carbon neutrality action plan. And all of this highlighted the important role that Westminster government has in galvanising action. This is an initiative to ensure that Westminster government takes action, and I would call for a recorded vote because I believe that councillors should be inconsistent with our climate emergency declaration supporting this motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Right. Do we need 5 people? Yes. Councillor Williams, do you have 5 people who will support the recorded vote?
Support.
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Support.
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 Support. Right. Okay. And then should we move to putting the motion to the vote? Mr. Taylor, would you like to carry out the roll call and report on the voting, please?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, when I call your name, please confirm whether you wish to vote for, against, or to abstain. Ryan Adams.
Sorry, I was expecting the table to come up. Against.
Christine Baker.
For.
David Beeman.
For.
Roger Blishin.
For.
Peter Clark.
For.
Carol Coburn.
Against.
Richard Cole.
For.
Steve Cosser.
Against.
Martin Darcy.
For.
Jerome Davidson.
For.
Kevin Denis.
Against.
Ali Dixon.
For.
Brian Edmonds.
Against.
Patricia Ellis.
Against.
David Else.
Against.
Jenny Else.
Against.
Jan Floyd Douglas.
Against.
Paul Follows.
For.
Mary Foroszewski.
Against.
Maxine Gale.
For.
Michael Goodridge.
Against.
John Gray.
Against.
Joan Hegan.
For.
Val Henry.
Against.
George Hess.
For.
Daniel Hunt.
Definitely for.
Jerry Hyman.
Abstain.
Peter Isherwood.
Against.
Anna James.
Against.
Robert Knowles.
Against.
Andy MacLeod.
For.
Penny Marriott.
For.
Peter Marriott.
Against.
Kyla Martin.
For.
Peter Martin.
Against.
Mark Merriweather.
For.
Stephen Mulliner.
Against.
John Neal.
Against.
Peter Nicholson.
For.
Nick Palmer.
For.
Julia Potts.
Against.
Ruth Reid. Councillor Reid.
Chair, Councillor Reid is here and visible on the camera, just can't hear her.
You're voting for Councillor Reid, is that correct? Okay, thank you. Paul Rivers.
For.
Penny Rivers.
Definitely for.
John Rubini.
For.
Anne-Marie Rosamond.
Definitely for.
Trevor Sadler.
Definitely against.
Richard Seaborn.
Against.
Liz Townsend.
Definitely for.
John Ward.
For.
Michaela Wicks.
For.
Steve Williams.
For.
George Wilson.
For.
Madam Mayor, that is 29 votes for, 23 against, and 1 abstention. So that is carried.
Just to reiterate the outcome of the vote, the motion is carried. The second motion has been submitted by Councillor George Wilson and seconded by Councillor Paul Follows and is set out in your agenda. Councillor Wilson, would you like to introduce your motion on the Surrey Fire and Rescue Service?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And hello, fellow councillors. Funnily enough, I think a lot of us received a letter from the Chief Fire Officer. So I'll start with that first of all. I had a look through the Brunel University report that he quoted, and I see nothing about cutting fire engines and cutting staff. When I read through it, it was more about the nuts and bolts of how you transform something, not the actual things that were being done. And another thing I picked up from that was response times. He quoted 8.57 minutes as being the average response time at the moment. When I get down to the rest of the nitty-gritty, that will show that the response time initially was 5 minutes, and it's been changed for 3 occasions since 2010. Anyway, I'll, if you bear with me, run through the figures. Implemented in April 2020, phase 1 of the Surrey County Council cuts removed 4 fire engines from night cover. As 75% of dwelling fires occur at night, this is extremely dangerous and quite a reckless cut. Phase 2 has cut another 3 fire engines from night cover, which will also have a detrimental effect on the cover. Phase 2 of the Making Surrey Safer plan calls for only 350 operational firefighters, which constitutes a 30% reduction in personnel since 2010. This, while we as a council and other councils in Surrey are being urged by government to build more and more accommodation. We have fire stations in Waverley, and I've got freedom of information figures from Surrey County Council showing the times that one or more of them was unavailable during shifts. Looking at the figures, in September in the daytime, there were 124 occasions where fire engines were not available. At night, it was 123 in December. In October, funnily enough, it evened out. It was 100 daytime and 100 nighttime, where in our 5 fire stations, 1 or more appliances was not available. On top of that, many firefighters have left the service to transfer to other fire and rescue services, as they're no longer willing to work in an environment which is detrimental to their health and safety. Whole-time fire engine crews have been reduced from 5 to 4. This is the norm now, 4 per fire engine. The Fire Brigade Union say that the safety of people and firefighters will be severely compromised by a fire engine crewed by less than 5 firefighters, mainly because it takes 5 firefighters to actually deploy breathing apparatus when they arrive at the fire. Now, in my past employment, I had occasion to enter quite a few rooms that were on fire, and I know how quickly fires can start and build. And I also know how much smoke can kill people, and that is the biggest killer of people with the fire service. So really, we need 5 firefighters at least on a fire engine, because they've got to wait for another fire engine to arrive before they can properly deploy. Surrey Fire and Rescue Service has failed to comply with its own emergency response standard, which has been downgraded 3 times since 2005 for the last 5 years, with a further cut of 70 firefighters and the removal of 7 fire engines from night cover this year. The possibility of them being able to continue to comply just vanishes. To give an example, Spelthorne Borough Council put a very similar motion forward which passed, and they quoted that at Fording Bridge, says he looking at his figures, the decrease in fire engine availability at Fording Bridge Fire Station was 75.8% in January 2020 and went down to 38.7% in October of this year, of last year. So I would urge you to write, or ask the leader to write to Surrey County Council to revisit the decisions they've made and at least give us some answers as to why they think that they're making Surrey safer. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Follows, would you like to second, or would you?
I would, of course, like to second, Madam Mayor, but I'd like to, with your indulgence, use my right to speak later in the debate, if that's acceptable to you.
Right, that's fine, Councillor Follows. Do I have any speakers? Yes, Councillor Hyman.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Madam Mayor, and thank you very much indeed to Councillor Wilson for this motion. I think there's a lot of people who are very concerned about this. A lot of our residents are concerned about the reduction in the fire cover and the apparent move towards fire prevention measures, but not actually being there with the hose and putting things out. I am concerned here, though, that at the end of this motion, the wording of it, it says that we request Surrey County Council to revisit this decision for the safety of our residents. And that doesn't make it clear to me which decision it is that we are asking Surrey County Council to revisit. As with the previous item, I am concerned I will abstain unless we do things properly. If there is a single decision, I've been led to believe that actually it was a series of decisions that have been made. I don't know whether they come under one decision that was made at some point and then the phases or whatever have been separate and not separate decisions. But if we are going to pass this, I might ask that somebody, preferably not me, to just rewords that so that we can take out the word decision and perhaps change it for decision-making process or something which more accurately describes it if it isn't a single decision that we're actually referring to. So that's my only concern with this, that we want that I would like it to be done properly. I know it's nitpicking, but there's no point saying to Surrey, please revisit that decision if they didn't actually have a decision there, a single one that needs to be revisited. So if that could be explained, please, I will be and sorted out. I'll be wholeheartedly behind this. And thank you very much, Councillor Wilson, for bringing it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The motion says that fire cover in Waverley has been very limited. I do not believe that is so, and I think the Chief Fire Officer's statement, which was circulated to all members this afternoon, has made that clear. The key changes made in the service are all part of the Making Surrey Safer plan, a plan scrutinised by the National Fire Chiefs Council, reviewed by Her Majesty's Inspectorate, assured by Brunel University, put into effect nearly a year ago, and so now tested under pressure. It was all about making changes to a service that had seen little change in 50 years. For instance, during recent years, across the UK, we've seen a near halving of fire incidents. You're now more likely to see a fire officer helping someone have a crashed car rather than putting out a fire at your own home. The new plan is less about reduction in resources and more about a rebalancing of those resources because so little has changed over the last 50 years. And a key change has been to step up fire incident prevention. Better surely that a fire incident never takes place at all. And that policy is working. In 2020, the service attended 8% fewer fire incidents. The service provides a response which is based upon risk and demand at a county level. It moves fire engines around the county using different fire stations as deployment locations, just as other emergency services in other counties do. When responding to emergencies, the control room sends the nearest appliance and the most suitable equipment to deal with an accident. During busy periods or when other appliances are nearer to an emergency, it calls on neighbouring fire services for support, a perfectly normal mutual aid arrangement, and that of course is reciprocated by Surrey. Since launching the plan in April 2020, the service have always reached or exceeded their minimum fire appliance availability targets, with at least 20 appliances being available during the day and 16 at night. The key thing, of course, is to measure performance. The service's response time in Waverley for the first appliance to a critical incident since last April is 8 minutes and 57 seconds. That's well within the response target of 10 minutes and is better than the average response time of 10 minutes and 39 seconds for the year before. The new plan is showing a trend of improvement for the safety of our residents. I note that the Deputy Leader is supporting this motion or is seconding the motion. I'm surprised that he didn't ask his Liberal Democrat Godalming running mate and sitting county councillor Penny Rivers to raise this in the correct forum, namely at Surrey County Full Council. He did not do that and she did not do that either. Worse still, Councillor Rivers, together with her other Liberal Democrat colleagues at the county only 2 weeks ago, voted against the county's budget, containing as it did some £17 million of capital expenditure or investment for the fire service over the next 5 years, and keeping the same level of general budget funding for the next year coming as for this year. Madam Chairman, I urge members to reject this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I have spoken to firefighters about these cuts to their service, and I can tell you that those I have spoken to feel completely despondent and morale in the service is very low. They, who do the job, have deep concerns about what they see as an erosion in the resilience of the service and what they feel is a move away from an emergency service to what is a firefighting business. Whilst the Chief Fire Officer paints a very different story, what is clear is that the boots on the ground hold a very different opinion to the top brass and don't think that these measures are safer. I certainly think we should listen very carefully to the people that actually do the job. Whilst the number of appliances look more than adequate, the breakdown of whether they are full-time crews at night or on call retained firefighters is not provided by the Chief Fire Officer. How many on-call crews do we actually have now at night across the borough? Our firefighters cover a wide rural area, and due to this dynamic deployment to other areas, there are times when our crews are at least a 20-minute journey away or more from their base, making response time of 10 minutes impossible to reach. And there could be times, like 2 nights ago, when there were no engines at all at any of the stations in Cranley, Dunsfold or Hazelmere. Godalming was the nearest station again, making it impossible to meet the required response time should there have been an emergency situation in one of those villages or towns. It is also clear that the firefighters have significant concerns about this change of approach and don't feel that their voices are being heard. I would very much support this proposal for a public review of this decision. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'm always uneasy when we have a councillor sitting in the council chamber criticising or almost questioning the words of a chief fire officer or anybody else for that matter who has taken the trouble to inform us. When I read this motion, I thought it was marginally worse than the first one, and that says a lot, I can tell you. It's all hearsay. Concern to learn appear to have resulted in. How are we as councillors meant to make informed decisions with wishy-washy wording like that? We've now just had Councillor Townsend assuring us that she's spoken to every firefighter in the area and they all disagree with the chief fire officer. I don't know whether they do or not. I have no proof of any of that. And I am quite prepared to believe the chief fire officer because I have no reason to doubt his word. I think it's quite disgraceful that we are coming down to this in this council chamber. I really think our standards have absolutely plummeted tonight, that we are putting ahead of the budget, which is the most important thing we do in a year, 2 of the most puerile motions that I've ever seen in this council chamber. And I am sorry, I am not going to support this. I think it was disgraceful that all the opposition, I think, voted against the budget to give the fire service more money, voted against the budget to give Farnham the money to do what it's supposed to be doing to improve its roads. What on earth are people playing at? We have got the chief fire officer, we have got proof, we have got measurements that we can see that the service is working. And quite frankly, until I see proof to the opposite of that, I cannot doubt the chief fire officer's word. And I really don't think we should be starting off as a council in doubting other people's words and preparing councillors who may or may not have their own agenda. I really do think we're getting to a very, very low level this evening, and I am not happy at all. I object to this. I object to the wording. I object to the lack of evidence, the lack of professionalism. I think this does not show Waverley Borough Council in a good light at all, and I will certainly not support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I'd like to congratulate my Labour colleague, George Wilson, for eloquently presenting this motion. It's something which I think he and colleagues who are pushing this across the county can be very proud of. I don't want to detain the council too long, but I'd like to respond to Councillor Martin, who claims that there has been little change in the fire service for many years. I looked up the actual figures for the number of firefighters available employed by Surrey Fire and Rescue Service. In 2010, there were 622 whole-time firefighters. And of those, there were 104 full-time equivalent on-call firefighters. The figure of 622 over the last 10 years has declined to 448. The number available full-time equivalent on-call has declined from 104 to 80. Figures don't lie. We are less protected than we were 10 years ago. Now, it would be possible to say that the difficult economic times, and therefore the Conservative group feels that it is necessary to reduce the level of protection. Well, at least that would be honest. But instead, we're getting a wave of complacency, as we so disappointingly saw in the debate on the first motion, where the Conservative councillors, one after another, followed what I understand to have been a binding whip imposed on them on this issue, to pose a reasonable cross-party approach. And we see again here that Conservative councillors are not prepared to put the safety of their residents ahead of their party political objectives. We've had speeches about how county councillors voted in Surrey. Well, what we've seen from Surrey is that they attempted to stop us debating this at all. And we, as borough councillors, have a right to put our residents first. I will be supporting this. I hope that the great majority of members will do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Cotter.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. If I can just make a quick reference to the last comment from Councillor Palmer. To accuse the Conservatives of party political activity in relation to these motions, I think most people picking up their agenda would have asked very quickly, why is it that we have two motions of this kind on an agenda in which we have to deal with our budget? We've got important reports about the local government commission, boundary commission work. We've got reports about us wanting to get closer to working with Guildford, really fundamental issues affecting Waverley. I think I know why they're here, and it's got something to do with the timing of the election and the election candidates, but people can make their own mind up about that. I think that's the cynical party political activity that we're seeing tonight, and no other. I think so far as the motion is concerned, it is one of the sloppiest motions that I've ever seen. The wording appears to have resulted, whatever does that mean? It looks as though when the chief fire officer, who incidentally has done the most magnificent job in my view in leading the local resilience forum and pulling together all the COVID efforts across the county and so on, presents us with the clear facts on the matter that the mover of the motion has to scrabble away at the last minute and came up with some statistics which frankly should have been presented before, and probably we didn't have a much chance to take in. That it's just ridiculous, frankly. And if I can just briefly refer to Councillor Martin's point, I really do hope we are going to get an answer this evening from Councillor Follows, or more appropriately perhaps from Councillor Rivers, as to why the Liberal Democrats did not raise these issues in the County Council and voted against a budget that provided for significant capital funding going forward for the fire and rescue service and provided pretty much for a level funded revenue budget. How can you possibly do that and be sincere about a motion of this kind? I think we've got to get real about the fire service. I happen to chair the relevant select committee at County for some years that had some role in starting to move forward the fire and rescue service. The fact of the matter is we have far less fires. There's been an increasing and very proper move towards preventative work in the fire and rescue service. And I think that obviously is the way to go. Of course, we've got to provide safe and fire cover. As for Councillor Townsend's comments, well, I think probably a lot of us have talked to firefighters as well. And I'm sure you probably listened to that which you want to hear. I've talked to a lot of firefighters over the time in my days in county and subsequently. And what I hear is a few of them who actually hark back to the days when the fire service was a very, very different animal, but quite a lot of more forward-thinking fire service officers who actually understand the need for the fire service to develop and change. This is a very poor, politically motivated motion, and I strongly urge this council, if it's got any integrity, to vote against it.
Thank you, Councillor Cotter. Councillor Mulliner. Oh, Councillor Mulliner, I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
I want to start off with a quick general point that I think these two motions tonight have shown the value of such motions in future being accompanied by a proper paper explaining why the mover of the motion feels it should be moved and what the evidence and backing is. To an extent, I take Councillor Williams' point. There's quite a bit of information you could dig up on the climate and ecological emergency bill, but it still would have been helpful and I think courteous to fellow councillors if there was a paper supporting the motion and explaining why it was being called. In the case of Councillor Wilson's motion, this is potentially a very serious matter indeed, but it's the sort of thing where it was absolutely crucial, I think, that we did have a full statement of the reasons why he is as worried as he is. I'm sure he's entirely sincere about it, but I am left completely bereft of knowing where to think when we have Councillor Marty on the one hand and the Chief Fire Officer basically saying that things are okay and other people saying things are absolutely dreadful. I would actually urge that we don't take this motion forward at all tonight, but in fact we ask appropriate people to make inquiries which can answer these questions, and where the Chief Fire Officer's response is felt to be inadequate, for those details to be given. And then at the next council meeting, armed with a proper paper, we can then decide whether or not there is something that we as a Waverley Borough Council should be taking action on. The moment I feel completely uncertain, and I don't feel I can vote for a motion which is certainly very, very critical, yet appears to call into question the integrity of several people if it is to be supported. So, Madam Mayor, my real question is, can we please have papers supporting all these motions in future? Thank you.
Now, is that an amendment or was there a comment?
It is a comment. I don't know whether there's any means under our constitution not to vote on a motion once it's been moved and seconded, but really I feel this is a sort of motion that shouldn't be discussed in this form, but clearly it's now underway. And I suppose I'm hoping more for a better approach in future meetings.
Well, thank you, Councillor Mulliner. Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As many of you know, I was part of an emergency service some years ago. Unfortunately, that service was cut and cut and cut, and they themselves are now struggling, and the police are now being given more money and men. Once you start to cut, then it is too late. I would support this motion because 10 to 15 years ago, I remember again fighting the fire service in their cuts locally at Hazelmere, where they were getting rid of full-time service, bringing in retained, and then putting on much more effort, they say, towards fire prevention. We can throw as many figures as we like at it, and somebody mentioned about fire in houses and now more likely to cut people out of cars. That's probably correct. But if you turn up at the scene of an accident and you find that somebody's got to be cut out of a car, then if the fire brigade aren't available, who the heck is going to do it? Because very few people would carry cutters in their car. So I would certainly support the fire service and I would support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rubini. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First thing I'd like to say is that Surrey does not actually have a very good track record in running a fire service. But not all that long ago in 2018, they got a very poor report from the inspectorate. They were deemed as being inadequate in efficiency in looking after the safety of people. So it was certainly a serious problem then. And I remember actually visiting an open day, the fire service at Farnham Fire Station, and I spoke to quite a few of the firemen, and they were all, there was a clear morale problem there. There was a clear situation where the fire service wasn't being well managed. So there was deemed as being poorly managed both by the inspectorate and by the firemen itself. Now, I happen to be on the select committee that Councillor Costa referred to, and I'm happen to be vice chairman of that. And we actually had the opportunity to speak to the chief fire officer and the cabinet member responsible. And I don't doubt for 1 minute the sincerity of the chief fire officer, and that he's trying to do his best to keep Surrey safe, and he believes in what he's doing. And I would say the same about the cabinet members. They're not actually out just to save money. They're out to try and do their best, but they are working within constrained budgets. There's no doubt about that, and that is part of the problem. But when I questioned the chief fire officer, he did agree that even now there's still a significant morale problem within the fire service with the actual firemen themselves. And that was substantiated by the fact that they were threatening to go on strike, and they came to the outside of County Hall and were, if you like, canvassing the councillors as they went in. So I spoke to a few of the firemen then. So there's still a serious problem within the fire service of morale. In that sense, it's not being well managed. And so they've got a problem with both the firefighters, and they've got a problem with the general public as well. They haven't got the public on their side. So there's still serious problems at Surrey with the fire service. And in that sense, I think actually this motion is worthwhile in the sense that it's worthwhile saying to Surrey that they need to look carefully at what they're doing and whether they're doing it correctly. In terms of some of the other points that have been made, they're just debating points actually. When you vote in terms of a budget, you can't say I support one part of the budget, but I don't support other parts of the budget. If you don't like the budget overall, you have to vote for everything, against everything. But the councillors, the opposition councillors, particularly Councillor Stephen Spence and myself, have made it clear which part of the budgets we support and which parts we don't support. So it's just a debating point to make points about you didn't vote against it, you didn't vote for the budget. That's just a nonsense point. So I think there's a serious problem about the fire service. Actually, the other thing I don't like at Surrey, by the way, many fire services aren't run by county councils, and Surrey are using the chief fire officer to do all sorts of other things, as Councillor Costa mentioned. Actually, I'm not sure they should be doing that. They should be focusing on his principal job, which is to run the fire service. But he's given a wider range of duties, and as you said, dealing with COVID and various other things like that. And to my mind, that's to some extent taking the eye off the ball. So I have concerns about Surrey's fire service, but I would say that it's not being run by people who don't care. The chief fire officer clearly does care. He believes he's doing a good job and so on and so forth. But there's so many things to be concerned about. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And in the first instance, I just feel the need to respond to Councillor Coburn. She says we're puerile here. Frankly, regardless of the quality of any motions that have ever come forward in this particular place, I'm proud that we will actually debate such motions and we'll bring them forward from all parties, from all levels in the council, from the executive and from the backbenches. And we'll do that and have a proper debate without it being a whipped torpor of a council that will just go through the motions, which is what we experienced for years. So I'm pretty glad that we're here actually having these discussions. And although many of you will feel that the last hour has been a complete waste of time, they are subjects that would never have even come up in the former administration. So I'm proud we're talking about them at all. And this might be a Surrey County Council matter, but it's something that impacts our residents. And I think we've got a duty to comment. And as Councillor Martin has introduced the discussion on Surrey County Council's budget, I ask the opposition now, I suppose, I wonder if they will vote for our budget tonight, because perhaps unlike the budget at Surrey County Council, it doesn't cut services and is based on good financial governance at its core. So just to go back into that, before the budget at Surrey, they cut, for example, the children's centres in my ward and Councillor Rosamond's ward by 51%. And the new budget cut it even more than that. So when you ask why people didn't vote for it, maybe look at things like that, because actually that might be why. And things like the fire service cuts are even more reason why. Now, their budget had an absolute ton of capital funding and very little revenue, putting it into the unsound category for those that choose to read a budget rather than just simply take a whip on the subject. So from my point of view, there are some serious cuts that are going on, and the fire service is one of them. So let's go back to the actual topic. we're talking about the fire service. Councillor Palmer and Councillor Wilson in their speeches have illustrated the issues that we've got. And nobody here is trying to impugn the reputation or the word of the Chief Fire Officer. What we're doing here is merely seeking to find more information and ask them to revisit the Safer Surrey plan, which to me in many respects is one of those contradictions in terms of a title. So to quote a colleague of mine who mentioned this to me recently, I mean, engines without operators are like hospital beds without doctors and nurses. And for me, it's something that you can accurately say you've spent more money on, but you might not necessarily have improved the service. And this is one of those areas where that's likely the case. So I'm very heartily in support of this motion, and I'm sure we can have a reasonable and amicable discussion with Surrey and the fire service to get to the core of what the problems are. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I have sympathy with this motion, and also with what Councillor Hyman said at the start, because perhaps the wording is a bit loose, and maybe we should be concentrating on the service in Waverley. Since the motion came out, I've done quite a bit of research because there was no background paper, and looked at the fire service's current maps and allocations. And if you look at the map, you'll see the cover in northwest Surrey. This sounds like the health service and the ambulance, doesn't it? The cover in the northwest Surrey, lots of stations very close together. And when you look at Waverley, suddenly a very blank map. In Waverley, there are only two stations with full-time officers, and that is Farnham and Hazelmere. And Hazelmere is only full-time during the day, but retained at night and at weekends. Hazelmere has suffered a 50% loss of cover. I can remember some years ago, they were having two fire stations in Hazelmere, West Sussex Fire Brigade and the Surrey. And when West Sussex closed, that tender came to the Surrey station with its retained crew. And Hazelmere had 24-hour full-time cover and full-time retained for the second tender. Now looking at the website, all Hazelmere has is one tender, full-time during the day, and then weekends and nights retained cover. Probably a more than 50% cover for Hazelmere, and that's where I'm worried about. I'm worried about Hazelmere. But if you look more widely over all of Waverley, I see Godalming, which is a fully retained station, has gone down from 2 to 1. Farnham has lost a tender, and I think Cranley has, and well, I don't know how often Dunsfold turn out, but not very often, I think. Now, the Chief Fire Officer, and I'm sure he means well, says mutual aid can be used. Those are his words, mutual aid. Well, mutual aid from adjoining counties for Hazelmere for full time, the nearest is Chichester, Havant, and Aldershot. I don't think that's within the 10 minutes. If it is, perhaps they're coming by helicopter. It's a matter of safety. And we have reduced throughout the area. Cranley's cover is only retained. Perhaps they rely on Horsham. And a few years ago, members of the previous administration remember that Surrey suggested closing Godalming and Hazelmere fire stations and moving it to Milford. This would leave Hazelmere without any cover within 8 minutes. And I would like, Leader, the confirmation that our officers in planning are not encouraging Surrey to close the station so that it can be a part of the town centre development. So in summary, speaking about Hazelmere, but Waverley and all, there has been a 50% cut in fire cover over years, and it has been drip, drip, drip. This hasn't just happened. I can remember years ago, like Councillor Rubini, I was in the emergency service for some 40 years. And many years ago, attending an accident at Hindhead, this is some 30 years ago, with a person trapped in the car, and the first attendance was Aldershot. The second was Greyshot, retained, and Surrey came along 30 minutes later. So this isn't a new problem. This corner of the county does not get good cover from any of the emergency services, if you look at the back.
Councillor, You wrap up, please.
Yes, I will indeed. Thank you. If we look, there have been local fires. Chiddingfold surgery burned to the ground. Thursley Common out of control. So we do need to look carefully at the safety of our residents. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Knowles. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Now, I may be naive, Madam Mayor, but because this motion was coming up, I took the trouble of doing some research on this. And it appears that 9% of Surrey's firefighters have left the fire service since March, and that certainly underscores the comments that Councillor MacLeod made regarding the low morale of the fire service. Surrey now has 380 operational personnel, which is down from 558, an overall reduction of 31% since 2010. Now, you know, my brother-in-law gave his life to the fire service, and I am aware only secondhand of the enormous pressures that fire service staff are under and the huge dedication that they bring to the job. And so I am disturbed, quite frankly, in hearing of the low level of morale in the fire service. And particularly I'm disturbed to read that the Fire Brigade Union has revealed that Surrey firefighters are under such enormous pressure and under such threat at the moment. Surrey Fire Brigade's Union Secretary Graham Whitfield is quoted as saying, "A culture of mistreatment has emanated from the very highest levels of the Surrey Fire and Rescue Service. The union that represents these dedicated public servants describe the service as threadbare and refer to a toxic culture. That is something which Surrey County Council should be addressing. This is a very important motion. The response and what I read about the Surrey Fire Service is a terrible indictment, and I believe that we should not be ignoring it. And I will be supporting this motion, and I will call again for a recorded vote on this motion when the time comes.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Beeman.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I tried to do some research on this topic this afternoon, and I got myself completely confused and lost as to what the full impact would be. I would agree with Councillor Mulliner that in future events, we really should have a detailed paper behind these motions. At the end of the day, I will just say this. The one statistic that seems to be not challenged is that despite everything, that the response time in Waverley has been reduced from 10 minutes 39 seconds to 8 minutes 57 seconds. So I suppose the plan is working in some ways, but I don't think I have enough information to actually vote either way, and I should be abstaining on this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beeman. Councillor Forashevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, everyone. I'd just like to start by saying that I actually have some sympathy with this motion, and thank you to Councillor Wilson for bringing it forward. However, I totally agree with what Councillor Mulliner was talking about with regard to having that bit more information to give this very important and very delicate subject the substance it needed for members to make their informed choices. So I definitely would have liked to have seen a bit more information on that. But what I would say, whilst we can't make amendments because the Constitution doesn't allow us to, it is within the gift of the Councillor Wilson to withdraw, if he so wishes, to get the clarification that he needs and the papers for us members to make that decision on the basis of more evidence. So whilst I would have some sympathy, I would like to have known more. But what I would say, what I'm really, really hacked off about actually, is the accusations we've heard this evening about being whipped. I, for one, have not been whipped. I, for one, will not be whipped. Any decisions I make tonight, in the future or in the past, I have made because I have come to my own conclusions about it. So just to add to Councillor Follow's point, I actually will be voting for the budget this evening. So I'm saying that ahead of what's going on this evening and what will be said. But I, for one, have not been whipped, will not be whipped, nor have my fellow councillors either. So I wish we would stop this silly, pragmatic view that Conservatives just follow each other like sheep. We don't actually. So please stop it. It's tedious.
Thank you, Councillor Forrest-Evsky. Councillor Osman.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Having read this and looked at what the Chief Fire Officer said, I looked at the Home Office statistics today. Those figures that were released at the end of last year in November show that there's been the steepest rise in fire deaths in over a decade, showing the number of fire-related fatalities going from 1 to 9 from June 2018 to June 2019. And I know that there's a perception that this safer plan is going to work because it's going to educate people. Well, how can it work when the numbers of deaths have risen? They're slashing the services and they're trying to mitigate the risk through prevention alone. There's no response. So it's no coincidence that the number of fire deaths has risen at a time when response times have slowed. We just need to think back to the Thursley Common fire last year, when at one point there were fire engines from the whole of the surrounding area coming in. And in fact, it took one of the farmer's daughters who had a slurry lorry to come and put out some fires that just leapt over the road onto the other side. So that clearly shows there's a disparity between what's needed and what's available. So if anyone's interested, those death records are available, and that does refute what's been said. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rosman. Councillor Rivers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In brief, really, I'd like to associate myself with the comments about Surrey County Council and the fire service and lack of trust and low morale. And it may interest you to know that only yesterday I had an email from a resident of Charterhouse, and I'm looking at it. Despite 2 High Court judgments, Surrey is the only county in the country not to pay the pension to its retained firefighters. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rivers. Councillor Potts.
Madam Mayor, thank you very much. I'm not going to get into who has and hasn't been whipped and the pathetic assertions of both our Labour friends and Councillor Follows. I'm going to stick very quickly to a few of the facts that have come out tonight, and I'm talking about facts. And I too would like, if possible, please, when other motions are coming forward, to actually have a factual paper. That would be really helpful when we're looking and actually not just researching everything on the internet or getting things third hand. But the plain facts are, and Councillor Martin stated some of this earlier, that the Chief Fire Officer has sent to us a very detailed statement earlier today. And I, for one, am not an expert. He is the expert. And I am not about to start arguing and calling him a liar, which is basically what is being said by a number of the speakers here tonight, or certainly strongly inferred. The facts are, as we've already heard, even Councillor Beeman, who has done some additional research, has also corroborated this, that response times have improved. I'm sure there is still a long way to go, and much has been made about low morale, and I think Councillor MacLeod was referring to the public aren't on their side. Well, I'm not surprised if the public hear this sort of debate about the fire service. All our emergency services are absolutely crucial, and we should be doing everything we can to support them in so many ways. And this sort of debate, without all the facts to hand, and a lot of facts haven't been to hand, isn't helpful. As I say, I shall be voting against this motion tonight. I think it's very poorly worded. I don't think it gets to the heart of what possibly are concerns and legitimate concerns here. And I think that it's actually counterproductive and would be far better to use other means if there are this level of concern to actually engage directly with the Chief Fire Officer and understand a little bit more about what is actually going on. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Potts. And Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to be very brief. Can I say that this issue has been raised in the past, and the way that this council dealt with in the past was to actually bring it in on an overview and scrutiny. Overview and scrutiny have power to bring in people on issues that affect our residents. We could have called in the Chief Fire Officer or somebody from the fire department and to interrogate them on an overview and scrutiny committee. And I would have thought that would have been a far better and more productive and more satisfactory way of dealing with it than this motion. And I can confirm as Chief Whip of my party, there isn't a whip, if that's any help. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. I have no more hands. So Councillor Wilson, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I've listened with interest. I would apologise, first of all, for the lack of information. But the background to that is that the only avenue I had open to me was the local committee. And the local committee sent a missive out to all the members of the local committee saying we should not be discussing this. The figures I've got from Freedom of Information requests put forward by the Fire Brigade Union and also discussions with people. Now, a couple of things I'd point out is London Fire Brigade recently have said that they have a 388% higher call-out rate to assist Surrey than they did 5 years ago. To answer too many notes, sorry. I tried to raise that at the Community Wellbeing Committee, and the chair said that it was not within our remit to talk about other authorities. Therefore, I had no possibility of raising it with the council apart from at this meeting. I'm sorry that you feel it was badly written, but I think the one thing that we will get out of it, regardless of how the vote goes, we will now get some answers from Surrey, who just don't want us to talk about it. I think we should. I was told by the leader some time back when I raised the fact they were trying to silence us that we should be able to talk about it. So I commend the motion to you, even if you don't like the way it's written. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We've had a proposal that this should be done by roll call. Do we have 5 people who will support
Agreed.
that?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Yep. Yes, I will, of course.
Of course we do.
So there, we should put the motion to the vote. Mr. Taylor, will you call the roll call?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Brian Adams.
Abstain.
Christine Baker. Councillor Baker.
Yes, I apologise. Absolutely for.
Thank you. David Beeman.
Abstain.
Roger Blishen.
For.
Peter Clark.
For.
Carol Coburn.
Against.
Richard Cole.
Abstain.
Steve Cosser.
Against.
Martin Darcy.
For.
Jerome Davidson.
For.
Kevin Denis.
Abstain.
Sally Dixon.
For.
Brian Edmonds.
Without reservation. For.
Patricia Ellis.
For.
David Else.
Abstain.
Jenny Else.
Abstain.
Jan Floyd Douglas.
Sorry, abstain.
Paul Follows.
For.
Mary Foroszewski.
For.
Maxine Gale.
For.
Michael Goodridge.
Against.
John Gray.
Absolutely abstain.
Joan Hegan.
For.
Val Henry.
Abstain.
George Hess.
I'm for.
Daniel Hunt.
For.
Jerry Hyman.
For.
Peter Isherwood.
Against.
Anna James.
Against.
Robert Knowles.
For.
Andy MacLeod.
For.
Penny Marriott.
Abstain.
That was 4 for me.
4 for Penny Marriott. Peter Marriott.
Abstain.
Michaela Martin.
For.
Peter Martin.
Against.
Mark Merriweather.
Yes, I'm for.
Stephen Mulliner.
Abstain.
John Neal.
Abstain.
Peter Nicholson.
For.
Nick Palmer.
For.
Celia Potts.
Against.
Ruth Reed. Apologies, Councillor Reid. Can you indicate if you can't? Yep, I'll take that as a vote for. Thank you. Councillor Rivers, Paul Rivers.
For.
Penny Rivers.
For.
John Rubini.
For.
Anne-Marie Rosamond.
For.
Trevor Sadler. Councillor Sadler.
Against. Sorry, I was muted.
Thank you. Richard Seaborn.
Abstain.
Liz Townsend.
For.
John Ward.
For.
Michaela Wicks.
Definitely for.
Steve Williams. George Wilson.
I have to be for.
Indeed. So, Madam Mayor, that is 32 votes for, 8 votes against, and 13 abstentions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I would like to report the outcome of the vote is that the motion is carried. Thank you. I think that the point has come where we should perhaps have a 5-minute break for comfort. So if you could all come back here at 1 minute or 2 minutes, 1 minute past past, we will switch off the live feed for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Right, everybody, I hope that you've all managed to have a little break and come back. We now move on to item 9 on the agenda, and it would be, I think, useful to move on from 9.1 and 10 and cover them tonight if possible. So I think the leader, would you be prepared to do that in that order?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I would be delighted to do as you wish.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Would you like to pass the rule that allows us potentially to extend the debate beyond 10 p.m?
Yes, and yes. Do I put it to the members? Yes, and members, we need to debate this, I would think, past 10 o'clock. So is that agreed?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah, thank you.
Agreed.
So, Councillor Ward, would you like to introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I am pleased to propose the minutes of the executive meeting held on the 9th of February, that they be received and noted, and I am confident I have a seconder.
Pleased to second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. There are 7 Part 1 items for Council consideration, the first of which is the General Fund budget and the medium-term financial plan. This is not the budget and the financial plan that we wish to present to Council, but our hopes of having a more dynamic and progressive programme have been dashed by COVID and further impaired by the less than promised government support for us in reimbursing the unexpected extra expenditure and unanticipated severe loss of revenue. This is on top of the previous removal of the Government Revenue Support Grant, the RSG, the predicted reduction in new homes bonus, and of course the iniquitous situation of the meagre retention of local, and here I really stress the word local, business rates. Looking to the future, our crystal ball is severely clouded, yet again, by the spectre of negative RSG, which has only temporarily gone into abeyance. Many councils are in a far more precarious position than Waverley, but this does not alter the perilous state of our finances in trying to maintain efficient services for our residents. Regrettably, our ability to raise investment income from such things as property has also been severely curtailed by the government, restricting the terms of loans from the Public Works Loan Board and also hiking up the interest rates. This budget has been studied by the ONS committee, and most councillors will generally be familiar with our problems from the number of all councillor briefings that have been held by the portfolio holder and the officers. Therefore, with the Mayor's indulgence, having set the scene, I will now pass on to the portfolio holder, Councillor Merriweather, to go into the details of our proposals for plugging the millions of pounds hole in our finances and producing the legally required balanced budget, remembering that our ability to raise council tax is also limited by the government. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Hello again, everybody. I hope you're all refreshed from your short break. But I know many of you have seen this before, but I'll try and rattle through it as effectively as well as efficiently as I can. So this is the general fund budget for our next financial year, 21-22. And the 4-year medium-term financial plan through 24-25, as detailed on the pages of 2186 of your packs. And just a quick orientation, most of you should know this by now, our council balance sheet comprises our net assets that are the embodiment of our total reserves. The definition of those are highly regulated and the uses of them. The subject of this item, this agenda item, is only our general fund, which sits in our suite of so-called usable reserves and funds everything we do except for our council housing, which is funded by its own dedicated ring-fenced housing revenue account, which is the next item but one on our agenda tonight. So our general fund reserves also separate and distinguish revenue from capital funding because generally we're not allowed to fund revenue expenditure from capital reserves, although we are allowed to fund capital expenditure from revenue funds as well as from capital receipts and grants, which is something I'll return to shortly. And we do carry balances on these earmark reserves, and they arise where spends are spread over time or delayed often beyond the year in which the earmark is made. So to put next year's budget proposals into context, we also do need to reflect on the discussions we've had throughout this financial year, which isn't over yet, as the COVID pandemic has evolved. This time last year, pre-COVID, we considered a medium-term financial plan that was already under cost and income pressures outside of our control, principally due to planned government cuts to new homes bonus and what's left of our share of business rates, and all of that in the face of structural net cost inflationary pressures. Pre-COVID, we already expected these to increase by, on average, nearly £1.5 million each year over the 4-year horizon, and we'd identified measures to compensate for that, which were informed not least by the 2019 budget consultation and the elections. So COVID struck in March, and in August, we estimated our gross financial losses in this year alone to be £6.6 million, due more to lost income than the extra costs of the huge demands responding to the pandemic made on our resources. Still, back in August, because confirmed government financial support at that time was less than a quarter of that loss, we had to leverage further emergency savings, which covered nearly half of the balance, and for the remainder, we identified earmarked reserves, which could be commandeered in the event that future government support wasn't received. We agreed then that if the further government support was received, it would be applied first to reducing and reversing these reserve drawdowns. Since then, two things. The government's additional lost income grant has emerged, but so also has the sheer scale of the extended impact of COVID on our finances into next year and beyond. So while we expect the additional government support for this year to be around £2.2 million, given the sustained COVID losses we expect beyond this year, we believe that it's premature to use all of that £2.2 million wholly to offset reserve drawdowns this year, and we're proposing instead that £2 million of it be repurposed to next year as a COVID risk reserve, thereby maintaining the principle that we established and agreed for this year's contingency budget by rolling it forward into next year. So just drilling down then into the detail of next year's budget, I'm going to start with first net service cost, where of course COVID still dominates. Of the gross budgetary pressures for the whole year, £3.8 million are COVID related and almost entirely income losses, against which to date the government's only committed to compensate us for those impacting just the first quarter of the year. Of course, we still face the ongoing structural net cost inflationary pressures for the whole year, identified previously. And while we continue to pursue the medium-term financial plan work streams started in prior years, some of the potential benefits of even these are now also being threatened by COVID, and most significantly our property investment strategy, which will also, as the leader said, be severely impaired by government changes to Public Works Loan Board eligibility, so much so that we've halved our growth target for that pillar. Beyond our net service cost, even after allowing for the suspension of non-essential capital and reserve contributions and the release of £1 million from the proposed COVID risk reserve, we still have little choice, regrettably, but to increase our share of council tax by the £5 bandy equivalent, albeit thankfully we're able to maintain at least our council tax support scheme. Beyond next year, in fact, we expect COVID to impact at least until 2024. And assuming that the government does still take what's left of our business rates and new homes bonus, and that our underlying structural cost pressures remain, so we'll need to draw down fully on the remaining COVID risk reserve and identify and secure further savings or additional income, increasing on average by £1 million each year over the 4-year medium-term financial plan horizon. Now, apologies for the psychedelic nature of this slide, but I just want to briefly comment also on COVID's knock-on effect on our general fund capital investment program. And that is for this budget, specific to our own capital investment on our own general fund assets, but not other infrastructure investment, which is funded elsewhere beyond this budget. As Annex 5 explains, general fund revenue contributions are only one way, one out of many sources of funding for capital spending, which otherwise include, for example, capital receipts from the sale of our own assets, to external sources, including grants, Section 106 and CIL contributions, which come from developers. Even before COVID, it was recognised, for example, by the Budget Strategy Working Group, that structural budgetary pressures could have a knock-on effect on our ability to make capital contributions from revenue. But now, in the absence of sufficient government support, COVID has exhausted all but essential general fund revenue capacity to contribute to capital projects at a time when the competition for capital funding is increasing. However, the funding landscape for capital projects was already evolving pre-COVID too, for example, with the introduction of CIL, to name just one, and the team has already started the huge effort of identifying and securing appropriate alternative funding to replace whatever is lost from general fund revenue to COVID. So while we press ahead with the existing medium-term financial plan work streams, we believe it is important to refresh on the 2019 budget consultation, given our residents and our experience of COVID, and we are looking at how best to do that. In the meantime, we'll continue to press as hard as ever for a fairer, sustainable funding structure from government, both for COVID and for the structural flaws we accept exist in the business rate system. And I am pleased to note that we seem to have a cross-party agreement on the wording of a letter that the council will submit on that. We will review capital projects needing funding from general fund revenue to seek suitable alternatives, and we are reassessing our earmark reserves and identifying other sustainable strategic initiatives, including collaboration with other willing partners.
Councillor Merriweather, could you wrap up, please?
Last slide, Madam Mayor. So uncertainty, of course, pervades the proposed budget, and as a council, we'll still have to deal with the economic consequences of Brexit as well as COVID, and the same applies to our residents. And for all this, we must not only plan on the basis of a dysfunctional funding system in which we're expected to operate, but also that the government may still pursue regulatory changes that further impair our ability to compensate for it. Thank you, Madam Mayor. It would be remiss of me not to thank the entire team who put so much effort in over the last 12 months dealing with COVID as well as their normal day jobs. And I would like to thank all of the councillors across the council for their support and constructive contributions to everything that we've had to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Potts.
Madam Mayor, thank you very much. Colleagues, as leader of a responsible Conservative opposition, I fully recognise that now is not the time to play tribal politics, and we certainly won't be doing that this evening with the two budgets before us. Things are far too important and the situation we're in is grave. I'll leave that to people like the leader of the Liberal Democrats Party. So we will not be opposing this budget, as the Farnham residents and the Liberal Democrats did, and you heard about that and their conduct earlier at the Surrey budget, where they opposed investment in the fire service and they opposed investment in improvements in town centres such as Farnham. I've been very pleased to work with Councillor Ward, and I'm pleased to say and hear Councillor Merriweather acknowledge that we have cross-party agreement on a letter that will be submitted to the Secretary of State in relation to lobbying for much fairer distribution of business rates. It's something we're all agreed on. I think we've been agreed on that for a number of months, and I'm hoping that we will get a good outcome from that as we work with the LGA and other bodies supporting this council. But the brutal facts are that we are in a position of grave uncertainty as a borough council in many ways. And yes, we're fortunate that we've received a significant amount of government compensation. By the end of this financial year, that should amount to about £2.2 million, but there's still a huge gap to fill. And we have to face facts that from a financial and a budgetary perspective, our two key income generators in the form of car parks and our leisure centres have fallen off a financial cliff, mainly as the result of the pandemic and the knock-on effects from that. We cannot have a bankrupt council. All of you will be aware that unlike many other public bodies, the borough council, like other councils, cannot run at a deficit. We just simply cannot. So we have a situation of huge financial uncertainty. I do have some concerns, as do members of my group, about this budget, which I do believe is somewhat politically flawed in many ways and does appear to be overly pessimistic. But we have to recognise that we cannot just cut everything, every service, the majority of our capital projects, and we cannot just use reserves and new homes bonus, both built up over many years of careful and prudent financial management by the Conservative administration. And one of my biggest concerns of that of my group, and I think many of us have acknowledged it at the briefings as well, is the financial risk that remains with our leisure centres. £2.7 million so far paid out in compensation to Places for People. Now, I understand that that is part of a contractual agreement. I understand that we, like many other local authorities, are in a really difficult position with that. I understand and I really do appreciate the work that the portfolio holder and other officers are doing and continue to do to try and work with Places for People. And I've had numerous conversations with Mr. Clark about this. But I would seek an assurance this evening that that work and those discussions will continue. And as we ease out of lockdown, our leisure centres are likely to look and need to operate in a very different manner. And I just hope that we can put some pressure to bear on Places for People, a large multinational company, that they will work with local authorities, such as Waverley, to make sure that future compensation is kept to an absolute minimum, because I do fear that if we don't, then there won't be all those wonderful leisure centres that for so long we've taken for granted to come back to, because we simply will not be able to bear the cost of the compensation longer term. I do believe that we should be looking proactively at ways to move forward with new projects that we can invest in and will generate both income and benefit our residents. And I would really urge the administration to grasp that opportunity, because despite COVID, there are opportunities. Many of our residents and communities will be seeking a different type of lifestyle. I'm sure that many of us would agree with that cross-party. And we've got an opportunity here to really proactively shape that. For example, let's look at Cranley Leisure Centre again. Let's look at a wider community hub for Cranley to incorporate more than just a leisure centre. We've got opportunities. Let's use and let's invest for the greater good and for our residents, as well as investing in our communities. COVID has been devastating. I'm not underplaying that. But as lifestyles change, which they will, we in Waverley have many local attractions, open spaces that are going to become even more important. So let us reshape our communities. Let us really take the lead so that there's a win-win as we maximise opportunities with investment, with our amazing outdoor spaces, our common land, our parks, and our many other assets that will ensure that we deliver both financial benefit as well as benefits to the health and well-being of all in our communities. Madam Mayor, that is my response to the budget. As I say, the Conservative group have not been whipped, but it is my understanding that the majority of them will be supporting the budget tonight. I will be supporting the budget tonight, despite some reservations. I would like to take this opportunity as well to thank Councillor Merriweather for his very informative briefings, and also to thank all the officers, not just the finance officers, but all the officers who've worked so hard this year for us, for our communities, and have just done above and beyond what I think anyone would have expected when we all sat here last year and talked about the budget. Madam Mayor, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Potts. Can I invite speakers? Are there any speakers? Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And like the Leader of the Opposition, the very first thing I have to say is thank you to the finance team and to the portfolio holder. In concert with our values of openness and transparency, the portfolio holder and the finance team have led numerous sessions with councillors. He has patiently answered questions, sometimes more than once, from anybody that asked him, to the point that I might even tentatively sit here and claim to vaguely understand the subject, which is not something I would do lightly in a council budget setting meeting at 9:30 at night. What is very clear is that COVID has been a huge factor in our revenue. Some of the money from government has not been forthcoming or has been vastly less than is required, as the budget details presented very clearly by the portfolio holder. Now, I recall a comment from the Secretary of State for Local Government last year that councils would not be left out of pocket. At the moment, we are yet to see that promise fulfilled. I hope that there is still time for that promise to be met. But we should also be realistic about this. COVID merely compounds the pre-existing, significant and deeply inequitable funding settlement for local government. And as we watch a government have time to propose and retract ill-conceived planning reforms and subsequently claim it does not have time to conduct again, it's fair funding review. We are sat here realistically looking at a budget that has to factor in issues with COVID and pre-existing budgetary constraints upon local government at all levels. Now, I'm extremely pleased that we have safeguarded the SLAs to all those organisations that have done not just their job in the borough, but have gone so far above and beyond. I don't think really any councillor here could properly articulate the amount that they have given, along, by the way, with our own staff here at Waverley. And so I'm extremely pleased that we are maintaining that budget as it is, and that we are making sure those organisations have certainty in their funding going forward for the next year. And while I hope that we will be looking at funding structures in more depth for these organisations going forward, I'm pleased that we haven't given them increased uncertainty by doing that now during a pandemic. That would have been irresponsible, and we've made the right decision there, I believe. I'm also very pleased that a cross-party letter regarding the potentially even greater inequality of business rates seems to be forthcoming from all parties, which was something that was long ago discussed, but continues to be relevant to our funding situation, with around 4 to 5 pence in the pound being retained in Waverley at any point, which is just frankly ridiculous. I'm not going to comment on the political issues, and I'm not going to do the thing where I say I'm not going to be political and then be political. I'll leave that for tonight. It's very late in the day. I think we're all done with that. But I will say that, once again, thank you to the portfolio holder and the finance team for going above and beyond and making sure that not only have we had to do this budget once, but I'm not sure what the number is now. I'm not sure if it's equal to the number of national lockdowns, but it must be getting there as we've been through the budget and revised the estimates and revised the forecasting. That has been a lot of additional work from a finance team that was already overstretched. So I want to thank absolutely every single one of them for what they're doing. And I heartily commend this budget to council, and I will be giving it my full vocal vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, thank you. So just wanted to say thanks very much to Councillor Merriweather and all the officers for the work that they've put into that report. From what was said, it sounds as though the council was promised one thing in terms of support from the government in respect of COVID in particular, and hasn't necessarily received everything that was promised, certainly to date, which if anybody follows events closely over the last couple of years, should not really be a surprise to anybody. You know, it seems to me that a lot of the issues in respect of COVID and the impact that it's had on the country have been exacerbated by the fact that funding for so many areas has been completely slashed over the last 10 years. And then we come into a global pandemic, and you know, the situation basically has been exacerbated by the fact that everything's been cut. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk about the magic money tree, and you know, that apparently didn't exist. Well, it seems as though it does exist, depending on what you want to spend your money on. And to be slightly facetious, a recommendation, I guess the only one I would have for Councillor Merriweather would be, you know, if we need to find some money from somewhere, then there are worse places than we could go. Would be to go to Matt Hancock's pub landlord and maybe see if he has some cash that that he might be able to spare to us, because that seems to be you know, one of the better ways to secure some money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. For decades, regressive council tax has run ahead of incomes and inflations, causing much distress. However, it remains capped at Band H and mansions. Economic distress and social conscience prevent me from agreeing this maximum increase above 2%. I will be voting against it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Councillor Motherham.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I would like to thank Councillor Merriweather for his various presentations. He's given as clear an explanation of what is a complicated subject as can reasonably be hoped for. I have one question which came up, I didn't think has been answered. I've always regarded 600,000 a year as the size of the structural deficit, and I appreciate that it is going to rise as time passes. But I think he mentioned a figure of 1 million, and I would be grateful if he has time to explain why the difference, because The 600,000 is the inflationary effect upon staff pay and our contractual obligations. So clearly another factor is actually at work. And one thing I know that we would be grateful for confirmation of, and it may not be the right time to take, given how late it is, but I have been approached by those who support Walmer Hill Recreation Ground in Hazelmere to know what's happening to their grant or support for their re-roofing. And I do appreciate the circumstances, but I think a very clear answer to them would be very, very helpful. I think there's Councillor Beanie tried to help me today, but I can't say I'm 100% clear as to whether they can rely on the money happening or whether our current circumstances make that sadly impossible. And the only other comment I've got is that I think we all recognise that the uncertainties around future income for the coming year are huge. And I take it that he has chosen to put the 2.2 million or most of it coming from the government for this year's loss of income into this reserve, so he doesn't have to start moving money out of earmarked reserves next year unless things go completely pear-shaped. I look forward very much to seeing, when this year's accounts are over, a detailed account, a cause and effect account of how our initial budget ended up with the final figures and which business services suffered which losses or increased costs. I think that will be very valuable information. I thank Peter Vickers for the budget to budget cause and effect analysis, but it's the one going from our opening budget for this year to the closing position that I will be particularly interested in seeing. So thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Mulliner. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Like others, I'd just like to congratulate Councillor Merriweather for the terrific work he's done on the budget, but also the tremendous support he's had from the finance team, the finance officers, Graham Clark and his team. I think they've all done an excellent job in a very, very difficult situation. I quite enjoyed Councillor Potts' little speech, actually, particularly her opening, where she said she wasn't going to play politics and then immediately attack Councillor Follows. I quite enjoyed that. And then she repeated the argument, actually, that which we had already dealt with earlier, that if you didn't vote for the £1 billion budget at Surrey, you were voting against the fire service and the Farnham infrastructure plan. That is a nonsense argument, as I said before. Just a point of information, it's what's known as a false dichotomy, fallacious argument. I won't go into explaining what exactly that means in great detail, but it's giving people only two options when there are several other options actually available. And you just try to constrain them into saying there's only two options you can have. Anyway, I'll leave that with Councillor Potts to think about and come back on if she wishes to. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I looked at this budget and I looked at the fact that at this really hard time for everybody, we have to put prices up. And it goes against every instinct and every belief I have. But looking at the bigger picture, the amount of people that would suffer if we had to cut services so far outweighs those that will benefit, that reluctantly, with my arm up my back, I fully support this, and I thank Councillor Merriweather for the work that he and his team have done. I think they've done the best they can for our residents. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to answer some of Councillor Potts' concerns. I did give a brief update at the very beginning of the meeting about where we were with our leisure centres, and I just want to reiterate, and I have said it before to councillors, that officers have been working extremely hard to make sure that they always keep the best interest of our residents and also value for money at the core of our decision making, and that Places Leisure. And that they continue to work very, very closely with Places Leisure, that we are within the budget that we set, and that we will have to agree an approach taking into account that social distancing or some kind of statutory operating restrictions will carry on. But I can assure Councillor Potts that we are working hard to make a way forward on that, and there is provision within the budget, and we're keeping it under close scrutiny. With regards to Cranley Leisure Centre, well, we've already preempted that because we've been working with the parish council for many, many months now. You must have been reading the minutes. We've got some really great ideas for a potential leisure centre and the services that potentially could be offered there. And we've already applied for some funding for a feasibility study. So we're way ahead down the road there, Councillor Potts, I can assure you. And and obviously Cranley is my patch, as you know, and it's really important that we look at that project in the light of continuing restrictions potentially ahead for us, but also the kind of services that our residents would like to see or hope to see there. So we already have that covered. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to make a brief comment about the capital bids for 21-22, which are on page 83 of the papers. I think this is the 26th annual budget that I've gone through. I'm starting to understand it now, but I've never come across TBD before, which in effect means zero, because if we cannot at budget time come up with a project to support, then it has to go through, like anything else, it would have to be a special item during the year to amend our budget, and otherwise things come out of reserves. I mean, to be decided it is worthless, and I'm disappointed because I'm a supporter of climate change and dealing with it. And it has been mentioned earlier, about 3 hours ago, by one of my colleagues, that in 18 months not to come up with any project. After all, capital projects, good capital projects, can actually help further down the line on saving expense. And I would have hoped that we could have had something in there, but clearly nothing has materialized, and therefore we don't have anything in this financial year as it stands for climate change projects, which as I said, I find disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, councillors. I just wanted to join with everyone else in thanking Councillor Merriweather in all the work he's put in and helping us to understand the budget. Has been extremely useful. And I would like to relay my personal experience of working with him and his team on working to try and find grants and other sources of funding for capital projects. Particularly talking about the repairs to Wilmer House. I think it would like to be useful to say thank you to some of the council officers who've done such a lot of work to help us try and find some grants for these much needed repairs. So thanks to Kelvin Mills and Charlotte Graves. And if one thing I did think about, which we might want to look at as an additional source of income, would be a form of subscription or parking discs for our car parks, which would allow people to buy several months of parking potentially, and would also allow them to move away from using the machines, which obviously has lots of tactile elements to it, which is not quite so good when we're looking at ongoing COVID situation. So that's all I have to say. Thanks very much to Councillor Merriweather. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. I have Councillor Baker next.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I'm not going to comment on broad sweep of budget or any very big line items. I'd like us to look at the more modest contribution that the budget is making in terms of the extension of the service level agreements for another year. These go to some fairly large organisations that are there to help people in need, and some smaller ones. And I would just like to say that the extension of the service level agreement was received very positively by the Clockhouse Day Centre in Milford. I have the honour to represent the council on the Board of Trustees there, and I can tell you that the volunteers and the members of the board have been making huge efforts to help their vulnerable members through what has been a horrible experience for them in terms of the COVID crisis. And these efforts are going to be resolutely continued because there is an ongoing need. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for vulnerable people who have in the past attended the day centres, and I'm talking about all the day centres in Waverley now, to accustom themselves to maybe a gradual return. So I think that the extension of the service level agreements, in particular for the day centres, will be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do have several concerns with the budget that we have before us, particularly in the areas of property investment and leisure centres, the car parking strategy, and the very high level of cost savings and transformation savings that the administration have built into the budget. And much of this has been reviewed at the Value for Money Scrutiny Committee. But I have to say, the uncertainties that are caused by COVID and the high degree of judgment that's had to be employed into where the risks are and what they are, I think all of that makes it very difficult not to agree to maximise the income and therefore to raise council tax by the maximum that the government is permitting, which is the £5 at a band D, or what amounts to a 2.7% increase. None of us like to see council tax going up, but on this occasion I am prepared to support this budget and will certainly do so in the votes that are just about to take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'd like to certainly echo the thanks to the finance team and to Councillor Merriweather for the hard work, and others who have put in a lot of hard work on this almost impossible job. And thank all members, because I think it's been for a change, it's been very nice. It's been an almost entirely mature and factual debate. The comments that we've had from members, and I do agree with everything everybody said, which is probably a lame thing to say, but I do happen to, of course, mainly agree in principle with Councillor Edmonds and Councillor Wilson. We should not be putting prices up. We should not be putting up, certainly ahead of inflation. It is a regressive council tax against over inflation rises as a matter of principle. That said, you know, there are things that that residents can take away from it. They've saved an awful lot of money over the past year on car parking fees. They haven't paid it, and we've suffered for it. And in a way, they're going to be paying for it in future. But the compounding effect of putting up the council tax continuously, to me, I am personally against. So I do feel in a difficult position. I would like, certainly, to I mean, where Councillor Townsend said says you know, we're doing this in the best interests of residents. I do think that that's likely that many residents might query that, because they would say that in their best interests we would not be charging them above certainly above 2% or whatever. For consistency, I would normally, therefore, at this stage, sound out member support for a lower council tax rise and suggest that the savings came from, well, certainly issues which I've raised before, where we can save money, matters of law, where we could save money, but if we were to follow what the law says, as opposed to the external legal advice that we're getting, which has been consistently wrong for 15 years. So we do need to look at these things so that we're getting everything right. But I think everybody's put in a lot of hard work. I don't think it's fair of me to put members through a proposal to try and keep the rise down to under 2%, because we could discuss it for hours. I'm not going to put you through there. I won't put you through that, but I am not happy with this. I think we could save an extra 80 grand somewhere, which is all we'd need to do to bring it down to under 2%, we're from 2.77, say down to 1.95 or something like that would be, I think, a lot more acceptable to people. But frankly, I don't think it's going to make that much difference, because it's not going to get the support, obviously, from members in the chamber. So I won't waste any more time on this matter. I will be abstaining on this, but I do appreciate all the hard work that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Because of the late hour, I'll try and keep this very simple. On page 27, it actually says that it may be eligible to claim 2.2 million. My understanding is that we've already received a substantial part of that 2.2 million, that the claim is accepted, and we should either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year receive the balance. The reason for raising that is that is a receipt that should be applied to the current year. I have no problems with the COVID provision that Councillor Merriweather is proposing, but we should separate those two issues. The amount of government support received in this year is in fact 3.7 million, and I believe we're still looking to see if we can claim another 200,000. Going to the medium-term financial plan, I'm a very cynical finance man by training. And one thing I would like to see us include is some form of sensitivities. There are aspects of the medium-term financial plan which I think it's slightly over pessimistic, but I would like us to see us produce some form of sensitivities as saying these are the risks and these are the opportunities, rather than just coming up and saying we will get nothing from new homes bonus, we will get nothing from business rates, etc. And I understand why we do it. But I have a concern going there, is that we've made a purchase out of our internal borrowings. And those internal borrowings are of a cash pool, and we don't get any visibility to that cash pool. As we reduce our reserves, as other things are happening, as COVID has had a big impact, we should have the effect that that cash pool is being reduced. When we acquired and made the decision to purchase the last property, it said that if we needed to, that we would then go to the Public Works Loan Board to actually finance it. Well, that may not now be possible because of the rules. What I would ask the portfolio holder finance to do is to let us keep an eye on that cash pool and report it so that members can see where we're going with that. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Rosman.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. We can all cast our minds back to some months ago when we were told that local authorities would be compensated for their spending in COVID. Simply, we haven't been. There is a shortfall between what we've lost, what our losses are going across from loss of income from the leisure centres, which can't be recovered because it's a management claim rather than a direct claim. Robert Jenrick's statement of the House quite recently made that very clear that, you know, local authorities have to bear some of the burden. And in fact, I have a quote from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government that said, council tax plays an important role in helping fund the frontline services needed to respond to the pandemic. And it's up to the local authorities to use that council tax to help fund it. So they told us to go out and raise council tax. We are limited, but if you are going to share the burden, surely we should be able to have access to the greater funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rosman. Councillor Forashevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just like to add to what's already been said. Well done to everyone for this budget. It's got its flaws, of course it has, all budgets do, but given the current climate, who really could come up with something else as an alternative, because this is the best we can do in the current climate, in the current situation, with such unprecedented spending and so forth and so forth. So, you know, well done to everybody, because that couldn't have been easy. And I think we've shown ourselves all here tonight to be mature, sensible and realistic in accepting the fact that this is the best outcome we could possibly have at this moment in time, given the current climate financially. I am delighted to hear from Councillor Townsend about Cranley Leisure Centre. Leisure, as we know, is a very important part of our lifestyles for many, many people. It's also a very big part of our income stream, which we depend on. And I'm pleased to hear that Leisure Across will still be given the best it can do. I'm very pleased to hear that Cranley Leisure Centre is alive and kicking, and that there are many options being talked about and looked at. Let's make no bones about it. The fact of the matter is that when it comes to Cranley Leisure Centre, there's only one real viable option, and that is a completely new rebuild. Anything less than that is papering over the cracks, is putting sticky plasters on plasters. So anything other than a complete rebuild, and I think we have to bear that in mind. How that's going to emerge and how it's going to happen will take courage. It can take vision, it'll take consultation, and it'll take an awful lot of time and hard work. But it's absolutely doable if we actually do what is right. And I think we can do that. So I'm pleased to hear that it's alive and well, but I would reiterate that I think the only viable option is a complete rebuild. And I look forward to how that will emerge in the future. But well done to the officers and everyone involved with the budget, especially Councillor Merriweather. And that's all I have to say on the matter, but just well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forashevsky. Now, I don't have any more hands. Leader, could you sum up, please?
Certainly, Madam Mayor. This of the hour, I'll be very brief. Firstly, let me thank all councillors and officers who have managed to stay awake and soldier through this rather marathon session. And thank people generally for a very good standard of debate. I am particularly glad that the joint letter concerning business rates and other iniquities has been agreed. We talked about it some time ago with the principal opposition, and I sincerely thank them and the leader for bringing it to fruition, and we will get that off within the next day or so. Without it sounding too much like a bit of a love-in, I would like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for a very mature speech and a very good analysis of where we were going. She mentioned one interesting word, that the budget might be overly pessimistic. And that may or may not be right, but I think we have to be pessimistic at the moment. It's rather like Boris taking the brakes off the country. If you get it wrong, you have a huge problem. And if you've been a bit too pessimistic and you've erred a little bit on that side, at least it's the safe side. On Places Leisure, the portfolio holder has answered that. And I can also say that from my discussions with the other Surrey leaders and other leaders around, Places Leisure operate for a number of us, and our officers and others are talking together to, let's say, try and keep them more on the straight and narrow than they might wish to be. That really brings me to the end of what I wanted to say about that. But let's deal with this regressive nature of council tax. I mean, nobody likes to put council tax up, and a number of councils have referred to it. We have a regressive tax, or we have no tax. Short of the government tomorrow morning announcing a completely new tax and taking away it, it is our only income, apart from our car parks and our leisure centres, which are at the moment a financial disaster area. So it's all very well to go on about it being this terrible regressive tax, but it's the only one we've got, and it's the only way we can get enough money to keep the council going and to protect the services of our residents looking forward. So let's forget the fact, or not forget the fact, let's just learn to live with the fact that it's all we've got at the moment. Let's take to the streets and say, yes, it's a terrible tax, but right now we need it. Really, I don't want to say too much more. The hour is late. We've said a lot. I think there's a lot of good in this budget. And yes, as a number of speakers have said, it's hard to agree with every single phrase and every single line. But overall, I think the objections are small enough that I hope people can accept it as overall a decent budget and live with the things with which they are a little bit less happy. On that vein, as alluded to earlier, the budget should be all in or all out. So, Madam Mayor, I hope we will be able to follow the normal practice of dealing with it as a whole and not putting all 7 clauses to us singly at this hour of night. But that, Madam Mayor, is in your gift. I have nothing more to say other than commend this budget to the council. Thank you.
Right, there is a legal requirement that our decisions on setting the budget, that's the general fund budget and the HRA business plan, are taken as a recorded vote. Are there any objections to taking the 7 recommendations on the general fund budget en bloc?
I would like to object, Madam Mayor. In other words, I do not oppose. I'm not for the budget.
So is it your wish that you would take section 1?
No, sorry. I'm not sure what we're voting for. I just want to make sure that my vote against the budget is recorded. Thank you.
Right. But the proposal is that the 7 recommendations are taken together.
Fine.
I'm in support of that.
Right, thank you. Mr. Taylor, would you carry out the roll call and report on the voting, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Brian Adams.
Support.
Christine Baker.
4.
David Beeman.
4.
Roger Blisham.
4.
Peter Clark.
4.
Carol Coburn.
4.
Richard Cole.
4.
Steve Cosser.
4.
Martin Darcy.
4.
Jerome Davidson.
4.
Kevin Denis.
4.
Sally Dixon.
4.
Brian Edmonds.
4.
Patricia Ellis.
4.
David Else.
4.
Jenny Else.
4.
Paul Follows.
4.
Mary Forojewski.
4.
Maxine Gale.
4.
Michael Goodrich.
4.
John Gray.
4.
Joan Hegan.
4.
Val Henry.
4.
Daniel Hunt.
4.
Jerry Hyman.
Yes, apologies, Madam Mayor. I did actually put my hand up. I am abstain on recommendation 1 and 4 recommendations 2 to 7, and I don't know how you handle that.
We will note how you're voting across all of the different recommendations, Councillor Hyman. So can you just say that again for the record, please?
Abstain on recommendation 1, which is the above. Sorry, I've got an echo there. Abstain recommendation 1, 4 recommendations 2 to 7.
Yeah.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Peter Isherwood.
4.
Anna James.
4.
Robert Knowles.
4.
Andy MacLeod.
4.
Penny Marriott.
4.
The Marriott.
4.
Kyla Martin.
4.
Peter Martin.
4.
Mark Merriweather.
4.
Stephen Mulliner.
4.
John Neal.
4.
Peter Nicholson.
4.
Nick Palmer.
4.
Leah Potts.
4.
Ruth Reed.
4.
Paul Rivers.
4.
Penny Rivers.
4.
John Rubini.
4.
Anne-Marie Rosamond.
4.
Trevor Sadler.
Councillor Sadler has left the meeting.
Thank you. Richard Seaborn.
4.
Liz Townsend.
4.
John Ward.
4.
Michaela Wicks.
4.
Steve Williams.
4.
George Wilson.
4.
Thank you. So, Madam Mayor, for all recommendations except for the council tax.
Excuse me, Robin. I think that Councillor Edmonds would like to say something.
Go ahead, Councillor Edmonds.
Yes,
Edmund.
thank you. I thought we were merely voting that all items should be combined. I didn't think we were voting for the budget. If we were voting for the budget, I'm voting against the budget. Thank you.
Can I just confirm, are you voting against all 7 recommendations?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So just give me a moment. So with regards to the first recommendation, council tax, that is 48 votes in favour, 1 against and 1 abstention. And with regards to all of the other recommendations, that will be 49 votes for and 1 vote against.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. The outcome of the vote then is that the budget is carried as shown in 9.1. Right. It would be useful and very, because item 10 is the council tax setting report, a technical report. Shall we move immediately to 10 so that we can get on with budget setting, and then all these, this is a technical report that summarises all of the appropriate budgetary decisions that have been taken to enable the level of council tax to be determined, and specifies all of the individual levels of council tax for approval by the council. The recommendation is that the council agrees the council tax resolutions set out in the report. Are there any objections?
No.
Yes, we don't seem to have any objections. In that case, would members please unmute their microphones and indicate their agreement?
Agreed.
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 So, Madam Mayor, I think Councillor Hyman abstained. Were there any other abstentions?
Yes, please. Councillor Edmonds, thank you.
Sorry. The council tax setting resolutions are approved. Now it is 20 to 11. I don't know whether you wish to adjourn at this point, or whether, you wish to carry on with the HRA business plan.
Madam Mayor, as leader, I would certainly propose an adjournment.
I would
second that adjournment.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Supported.
Yeah.
Yeah, here.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Abstain.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Absolutely agree.
Consensus.
I'd like to carry on.
Party animal.
The meeting is adjourned until Thursday next, which is the 25th at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much.
No, this
Thank you
Thursday.
very much, Madam Mayor, and well done.
Yes, this Thursday. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Good night.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.